How did you hack the system and get a good grade for no effort? Oh, let me tell you the tale of my grammatically challenged roommate at the time. We were instructed to write a how-to paper for sophomore English class. We had to pick our topics during class and tell the teacher. Someone sitting close to us came up with the topic of how to write an A paper, so naturally my friend goes with how to write an F paper. His intentions were to write it as best as he could and receive an A. He wrote it so poorly and with multiple spelling and grammatical errors that the teacher, quote, loved the satirical vibe that he'd demonstrated in his paper and promptly gave him an A. In first-year university, I wrote a paper in a sociology class where I mixed up the word mores, a type of social norm, and more, a type of eel, and as such wrote about the impact of eels on law. For some reason, the teacher's assistant thought that my eel law paper wasn't too horrible and gave me a B. She told the entire class that someone wrote about social eels and that we needed to be more careful with our spelling, though. I had a college professor where I just didn't turn in my final and he gave me an A for the class anyways. Not sure why. I gave him some duck jerky earlier in the year, so maybe he really liked that. Wow, I guess duck jerky is what the kids are saying now. What has the world come to? I mean, that guy was 100% sure he'd lost your exam. He probably thought he lost it and didn't want to deal with it, so he gave you an A. Yeah, that's exactly what happened. I left one high school shortly after semester break, and all teachers gave me an A because they didn't have anything to go on. Went to another state, and they were so far into the semester that all the teachers decided that they couldn't hold me responsible for what they already taught, so they all gave me whatever grade I came in with. The only time in my life I got all A's. Turned in the same essay twice and got 2 different grades. I did the same with a sculpture. He went on and on about the clear improvements in craftsmanship since last week. I smiled and nodded. I had that with an old boss. She'd never signed the first or second document I bought her, so I'd prepare the one I wanted signed and a backup. I'd give her the real one, wait for her to check it back, give her the dummy one, she'd kick it back, and then I'd resubmit the initial one unchanged and she'd sign it. God, she was awful. Part of me would love to see these professors and bosses brought to task for their clearly moronic practices and habits that, if followed, are just going to create more work when they clearly aren't checking properly to begin with. But on the other hand, unless you get the rest of the workplace or classmates involved to all go at once, all you're doing is making things difficult for yourself when they get a reprimand and treat you like crap for the rest of your time there. My senior year of high school, I was taking Spanish 12, or the senior level course. I'd been taking yearly Spanish courses since 7th grade at this point, so you'd think I'd be bueno by now. But no, I was not bueno. For our final presentation, we had to discuss any topic we wanted for a full 15 minutes. Obviously, all in Spanish. I knew I'd struggle, but I tried all year to actually improve, and I did not. Anyway, I did my presentation on the Oregon Trail computer game. You remember that? It was awesome. I played through and grabbed screenshots of different stages. I named my players after my friends in class. I went the full nueve, you could say. One flaw, I didn't have the vocabulary for a 15-minute speech on my game, so I tried to cheat. Each slide was well done, but what I said was the exact same with small changes. Mi familia es, and then a verb. I even wrote note cards and hid them in my crotch while I sat and pretended they were hidden. I read off them because remembering like 8 verbs was beyond me. Mucho trabajo. I ended up with a grade that would allow me to pass and leave language courses the rest of the year. My teacher knew I was an idiot and gave me a slide, I'm convinced. So I thought I could do the same next semester and signed up for Spanish 13. Easy college credit, I thought. I walked in. Same teacher. She took one look at me and wrote a pass to my counselor. You aren't taking this, butt leak. Go find a business course or something. So I did. Now I have a marketing degree that I don't use. Life is crazy, man. I had a bit of a weird teacher in geography way back when I was in the 9th grade. He was always correcting our assignments way too long after we handed them in. One time we had 2 assignments that should have been handed in over the course of 2 weeks. I only did one of them as I didn't really feel like doing the other one for some reason. When we got the assignments back like a month later or something, he didn't actually hand them back out to us, he just told us our grades from a piece of paper he was reading from. When he got to my desk, he gave me a B for the first one and an A for the one I didn't hand in. I don't think I deserved that. English 101. I forgot that an essay was due that following afternoon, but I had to work and study for a more important chemistry course. downloaded the smallest JPEG I could find, converted it into a PDF, and submitted this essay in the hopes that my professor would ask me to send it again and it would give me a buffer time of 24 to 48 hours. I checked the grade module and I got full points. No questions asked. I took biology and economics my freshman year of college, and I made the mistake of doing both classes in the morning. I worked a graveyard shift. The biology class was graded solely on 3 exams. The dates for them were in the syllabus, along with a summary of chapters covered in each. I only showed up on the first day and 3 exam days, crammed the night before, and did really well on the tests. Got an A. Economics was harder. Participation and attendance counted towards the grade, and a test date was moved, so I missed taking it. Fortunately, I had a buddy in the class who signed my name on the attendance sheet that day, and therefore I was able to convince my professor that he must have lost my exam. He let me retake it, and I eked out a B. The professor definitely knew something wasn't right. He repeated several times that he had never lost a student's work before, and wondered aloud why it was only mine. Generally, assignments are all kept together. To my credit, I did get defensive, and retaking the test was his suggestion, not mine. One other factor that might have played into things was the fact that this was a community college, not exactly the land of the academically upwardly mobile. Within the first couple of weeks of every term, half the class would stop showing up altogether and never be heard from again. I think he was just psyched that I gave enough of a crap to fight for a grade in his class. I once spent a full 2-hour period of a 9th grade class copying the questions slowly into another sheet of paper. It was a reading retention quiz or something. I guess she was only looking to see if you had written anything because I got full marks. The moral is, teachers are overworked and underpaid, and children's educations pay the price. Yes, that is also an important thing to consider here. Your takeaway from this video should not be all teachers are bad and lazy. Most of these individuals are probably struggling to do their enormous workloads and screw up the kids as little as possible while barely making ends meet, and they likely cut corners to try and make it work. Most, but not all, teachers deserve way more than they get. Sophomore year of college, I was taking a class that, about 2/3 of the way through the year, I totally checked out of. Rarely went to class, hardly ever paid attention when I did, just stopped caring. Leading up to the final, I of course now realized I knew none of the material. The final wasn't cumulative. I did the math and realized that I needed a 50% to pass the class with a C-. I showed up the day of the exam and realized I got the day wrong. My exam was the previous day. I emailed my professor in a panic and begged her for a chance to retake it or do some kind of extra credit, anything to get me a passing grade. No response. I go home for winter break assuming I'm going to have to retake the class. I haven't told my parents out of shame. Then 2 weeks later, my teacher finally replies. Her email went something like this. I'm so incredibly sorry, Paula. I left for vacation immediately after the exam and just now got back. It's obviously way too late for you to take the exam or do any kind of extra credit. The best I can do is take your current class average, an 89, and put that in for your exam grade. Would that be okay? So I get a B+ instead of the C- I was hoping for? Yes, that would be just fine, thank you. This is from college. It happened very recently. I take programming classes, and our mid-exam was to complete pre-written codes. The purpose of the code was to assign characteristics to a rocket. When the required characteristics are filled, the rocket will launch, and the completion status must be 100% for this to happen. If the completion status goes below 90%, the rocket won't launch. You get the idea. I was never good at programming. I understood the logic, but writing the codes down is like writing in an alien language. The exam was 2 hours, and in the span of 2 hours, my completion status was a mere 20%. My friends got 65, 80%, and even one was smart enough to change the pre-written codes and got 100%. I accepted the fact that I might fail this class, and I submitted my exam. I don't know exactly how the gods work up there, but I got a 95 on my mid-exam. Yes, 95. What the frick? I emailed the lecturer asking how I got such a score, and he said though I didn't get 100%, I implemented polymorphism into the codes, and he thought that was impressive. To this day, I still don't know what the frick polymorphism is, and how in the world I could have implemented it in my program. University, I had an 8 AM class that I would probably skip 1/3 of the time. I missed the day the midterm was given back, so I asked the professor to bring it to the next class. He starts to give me a hard time before looking at the exam and seeing the 100% written at the top and saying, "Good job." I go sit down, feeling pretty smart, and then go to glance through it before the class begins. For the main question, I see a couple of check marks, then triple question marks, nothing else for a page and a half, before the answer was circled with a check mark. Turns out I'd done the problem a wrong way, confused the teacher's assistant marking the test, and then somehow came to the correct answer at the end, so he just marked it completely correct. I had an essay that was explicitly due Tuesday in the 6th grade. I have no clue why it didn't click that it was due, not due, and only realized when my friends asked me about the essay on the bus. I told my teacher that I'd forgotten to print it out, ran home after the bus, typed it out in 15 to 30 minutes, and got a 97. This sadly started my habit of intense procrastination. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Picked a choice book. Had to do a project on it for Honours English class. Didn't read it, mildly researched the book, crapped out a pretty-looking PowerPoint, presented my fancy bullcrap book report in front of class and the teacher. Got an A-. In Year 9, or US Grade 8 history, we were given a small assignment as homework over the weekend. I can't remember what it was on, probably the Tudors or something, but it had to be about 500 words and summarize what we'd been doing for the past few weeks. Nothing too hard. I completed the homework to what I considered to be a reasonable standard and handed it in. However, when I received the grade, I was awarded a D, with the teacher's primary criticism being that I hadn't written enough material. I was confused by this since I'd written around 500 words like he'd asked. He told me to go away and redo it better. After getting home, I had some time to compare my work with my friends. I'd written the essay in size 11 font Times New Roman, and I'd neglected to include any images. This is pretty standard for higher grade academic work, but most of my peers had used size 14. Some even used Comic Sans. So what did I do? I scaled up the text, increased the spacing, and slapped a couple of generic pictures of Henry VIII's face on there and handed it in the next morning. Lo and behold, after he graded it, I got an A and a special mention for my hard work. I've never been so thrilled with myself and so disappointed in a teacher in my life. It just goes to show how another person's laziness can screw you over. My teacher yelled at the class for 10 minutes telling us how stupid we were. Turns out I had a 98 and everyone had to rewrite it. I got 99 a second time because he didn't believe in 100s. That last teacher is an absolute dinosaur. Sure, for some subjects, I get that there's no such thing as an objectively perfect essay, but you need to have a standard for something done as well as it possibly can be in your field. Those stupid professors who refuse on principle to give out A+s are even worse. Alright, to flip our subject matter, here's a bunch of answers from the other side of the coin. People who put in a lot of hard work and got absolutely shafted by their teachers. In my college dynamics course, we had a group project that we assigned different sections to do within our group. It was an incredibly difficult project, so we couldn't just completely split off and do it on our own, but there were 3 easier sections that could be done by one person. Anyways, in my group of 3, one of our guys just never showed up to any of our meetings. We're not jerks and we get that we're busy and all that, so we just give him the easiest stuff to do when he can get around to it. So my friend and I pull all-nighters until we finally complete it a few days before it was due. We send what we have to the third guy and he assures us he'll get the rest done. We check up on him the day before, asking if he wants help, and he says that he's got it and he'll bring the completed project into class. Of course, he walks in and says, "Sorry guys, never got around to it." We're basically missing the easiest third of our project because he couldn't tell us he needed help. I explained the situation to the teacher, but he had no sympathy. He said, "In the real world, you live and die by the people at your side," and graded us for what we completed, so, surprise, we failed. I didn't talk to that kid for the rest of the semester, even though he sat right next to me. In high school, we were asked to write a proposal for a new drinking age in the United States. I wrote about how it should be lowered to 12, but people who are past 12 now should have to wait until their next birthday, as in to avoid millions of teenagers becoming suddenly legal age to drink at once. I cited other countries with lower drinking ages and fewer drinking-related issues, discussed how it currently has a strong forbidden fruit appeal to high school kids, and that wouldn't be as big a deal. Also, kids could get introduced to alcohol and learn their limits while still being somewhat supervised by their parents. She gave me a 0 and claimed I was making fun of the assignment. Apparently everyone else only lowered it to 18, citing if you can go to war you can drink a beer. Or they even raised it. I actually really enjoyed the assignment and thought I was being practical. Frick me, I guess. The qualifications to access university in Scotland are known as Highers. I took Higher English, but I'm kinda crap at English, but good enough to pass the exam. When our prelim, a sort of test, rolled around in February, I failed it by like 2%, and the teacher decided that I wasn't good enough to sit the higher exam. She'd keep me in the class, but when the exams came around, I'd sit the lower tier Intermediate 2 exam, which would give me a lower tier qualification which is useless for just about anything. I sat this exam and ended up getting an A. A useless frickin' A, which would be no help to getting me into any university, effectively wasting my whole year in that class. This was 13 years ago now, and I'm still annoyed. My film studies professor always stressed there are no wrong interpretations of a film, only different ones. She then proceeded to give me a 60% on an essay because, and I quote, "Your interpretation of The Wrestler is simply incorrect. That's not the message the movie was trying to send." This was 10 years ago in the Midwest US. I took biology as a freshman in high school. There was this big bug collecting project that counted for like 40% of our first semester grade. Basically, we had to catch a bunch of bugs, kill them, pin them, and correctly label them with their scientific name. To get full credit, you had to catch a minimum of 30 unique bug species. The one thing I learned from that project that I still remember, I'm terrible at catching bugs. If you count the cricket I bought at the pet store, I managed 18 and received a D+ on the project. So despite earning A's on all of the tests and homework that semester, I earned a B in the class. You were punished for your unwillingness to kill for your overlords. Bad surf. In 5th grade, I was really excited to be assigned our first report for homework. Something about having to research and write up a few pages on the topic that made me feel like I was finally entering big kid school. Anyways, we had the weekend to do it, and my topic was tornadoes. They were randomly assigned, but I was pretty stoked to get a cool one. I spent all weekend doing research and writing up this 4 to 5 page paper on tornadoes with a picture or two thrown in. But I was really proud of it. I got a D because my teacher assumed my parents had done it for me and wouldn't discuss the matter. It wasn't up for a debate in any way. I've never been so crushed. Really killed whatever love I had to learn that year. I still did well in school, but my enthusiasm about learning and doing research on my own was never the same after that. I was in an upper-level political science class that had essay tests. The professor asked us questions and wanted us to explain the answers. Not bad. So I filled in 5 out of the 8 pages in a blue book and turned in my exam, positive I'd aced it. I received a 63%, and when I asked the professor why, he said that although all of my answers were correct, other people had filled in 8 out of 8 pages, and he had to grade all of the tests relative to each other. Ugh, quality not quantity should be the focus, surely. To a reasonable point. Surely, as a teacher, having shorter, better assignments is a plus, right? I'd want to encourage it. Let's get back to some grade hacks. Me and another guy I didn't know too well got assigned a joint presentation on a topic I can't quite remember. I think something to do with tourism in the outdoor industry. We did very little prep work after being assigned the task. Probably 80% of the PowerPoint was made in the hour right before the seminar. We rushed together about 10 slides with info copied from Wikipedia, decided which slides we'd each talk through, and left it at that. The presentation went pretty much flawlessly. We somehow managed to confidently blag our way through each slide as if we knew the topic by heart. When one of us would falter, the other one would jump in with some more bullcrap to cover. Come to the Q&A at the end, and we totally pulled it out of our butts to the point where the lecturer praised us for being so well prepared. I guess confidence is key. In the end, we got the equivalent of a B+. Definitely did not deserve that grade. I got the same grade as everyone else on a group project that crashed and burned spectacularly. I was the only person who did any work while the other 8 members of the group messed around. The group agreed with me and signed a letter saying I deserved an A for the work I put in and they'd done nothing. The teacher agreed and gave me a better grade. I did my senior project on building a computer. Like putting together a gaming rig from parts you'd buy on Newegg or Amazon. Since people think that's an impressive thing, I was able to get by with it no problem. The best part is that I'd already built it. I just assembled it, took pictures of myself putting it back together, talked about how to decide on what parts to get, the core components you need, among other things. I got a perfect grade. I had a Geology 101 class nicknamed Rocks for Jocks. The final was 5 to 7 p.m. on a Friday. We were warned that this was scheduled on day 1, there were to be no exceptions. All finals were to be done and grades to be in by midnight, so anyone graduating would know if they passed that night. During the semester, the professor had a breakdown at the beginning of class. He was using his own money to publish class notes on the web. The school would not compensate him. He then found out he was not only the lowest paid geology professor on campus, he found out he was the lowest paid teaching geologist, period. After his meltdown, he continued on, but his notes were no longer published. Everyone in the class got a B+. I asked people if they thought they should have gotten higher or lower, and nobody thought a B+ was right, but that's a grade most won't complain about. I doubt those finals were ever graded. Another slacker and I were assigned to make a poster on the socialism chapter in The Grapes of Wrath, include quotes and symbolism. We're both very bright, but even more lazy, so we kept putting it off until suddenly it was our turn to present. Thinking quickly, we had a palaver and agreed on a plan. It was a short chapter and he was a theatre kid, so he'd read the entire chapter out loud while I explained socialism as everyone doing their part and asked the whole class to come up and draw something on the whiteboard. So he got up front and he kicks a desk forward, stands on top of it and starts reading while I do my thing. By the end, the teacher was in tears and the smart kids that weren't slackers fumed because they knew what had really happened. But hey, extra credit! In short, spur-of-the-moment decision-making leads to extra credit for everyone else doing the work. How do adult children of helicopter parents deal with them later in life? My dad was never a helicopter parent. He was actually the complete opposite. My mum was a super helicopter parent. When I was a sophomore in high school, I got grounded from everything. I couldn't go anywhere or do anything. I had to go to school and come home. I couldn't watch TV unless it was about God. I didn't have a phone or a computer and couldn't listen to music. For months. It got worse and worse as time went on. She'd give me a curfew randomly one day and it would be different the next day. I'd get in trouble for not following a curfew I had no idea existed. She gaslit me so much that I often felt like I deserved what was happening to me. After going to therapy, I'm better able to identify between her more mean-spirited and bipolar tendencies. I'm working on minimizing contact with her, so whenever she's being a pain in my butt, I just tell her to F off. Mine say things and I just kind of go, like I'm agreeing that I'll do those things, but I never verbally say that I'll do those things. Same. It's easier to lie and agree than to tell the truth and spend the next half hour listening to a monologue. I still live with my parents. I avoid their invasive questions, but I'm pretty honest about everything I do choose to share with them. My siblings and I are whole adults, so they try to be less insane these days. Funny story though, the other day my sister and I were watching Pulp Fiction, and my dad waltzed into our room, stared at the TV for a second and goes, "That movie is for grown-ups." My sister said, "I'm 25. They still helicopter me, actually more than ever now that I'm 24, and I'm not sure what suddenly turned the dial up. However, I'm finally planning on moving out for good this year with my boyfriend. Every time I bring it up, they don't believe me, or they think I'm kidding and say it isn't happening. Oh well, I did tell them. I guess they'll get a reality check when the time comes, and it won't be on me. I just say no when I'm told to do something or follow a rule. I don't give a reason even when I'm asked why. It's so satisfying. I don't. That's how I deal with my parents later in life. I don't do it. I'm not no contact with them, but I'm absolutely firm on my boundaries and standing up for myself, and I don't let their tantrums sway me. On the other hand, the pressure does eat at me, but I'll never let them know that. This video is an odd and mostly positive sequel from one of our previous videos, What's the worst case of helicopter parents that you've ever seen? Feel free to check it out if you'd like to know more about what these adults are rebelling against. My parents weren't, but a friend moved to a different state and got engaged, and his mum still managed to be a helicopter parent, visiting at least 3 times a month and contacting either her or her significant other constantly. It ruined the engagement because the significant other finally had enough, because even though my friend was annoyed with her mum as well, she couldn't cut her mum off completely. I don't know all the details, but it must have been super annoying if someone was like, "I love you, but F having in-laws like this." She's now single and has moved back home. It's unfortunate. Honestly, me and my husband are trying to figure this out. My mother-in-law is a total helicopter parent. If one of us, me or my husband or his brother, doesn't respond to her messages within an hour or two, she'll bombard the other two about where we are or if something happened to us. She freaked out on me when I didn't respond to her after 3 hours. We were doing a cross-country drive, and she accused me of trying to shut her out and said we're never going to be a real family because of the walls that I've built up around myself. I don't know what to do. My husband won't stand up to her as much as I want him to, but I can't do this for the rest of my life. We have to establish some boundaries, but it's not my mom, so I can't be the one to initiate it. Well, yeah, he's obviously so used to it that he doesn't actually understand how damaging this is. I know of a few marriages that dissolved because of one helicopter parent. It's only going to get worse if you ever have children. They'll become helicopter grandparents, and that's even more stifling. They'll tell you exactly how to raise your own children and get angry when you don't take their overflowing advice. If he won't put his foot down and he gets mad at you for putting your foot down, then it's not going to last, and if it does, it won't be happy. I have a friend whose mother-in-law would just show up unannounced and expect to be welcomed in, asked for a key when they started pretending they weren't home, then eventually kept suggesting that they should move to her neighborhood to be closer as a family. The wife wanted to move across the country just to avoid this woman, and her mama's boy husband was aghast at this idea. They ended up divorcing. By the way, after posting this story, my inbox blew up with angry helicopter parents telling me to go F myself. I must have struck a nerve. It's funny to me that "it's family" is used to justify all sorts of awful behavior that you'd never rationalize if it wasn't coming from someone who created you. The person I was replying to was obviously upset with the situation they're in, and I've seen a number of similar situations play out in my life. Hence the advice. I'm low contact. A lot of us go low or no contact. My older brother and I moved out as soon as we turned 18. He moved to the opposite side of the country and I moved 3 states away. He still keeps low contact and is still on the East Coast. I came back home when I became homeless at 25 and noticed that while we were gone, my mother, the helicopter, had done a lot of soul-searching and realized that her controlling nature pushed her kids away. She's been in Codependence Anonymous for almost 8 years now, and I'm happy to say for the first time in my life, I enjoy spending time with my mum. It took a bit, but I was able to transition out of low contact. I had no idea they had recovery groups for codependent people. I'm glad to see your mother was able to progress and have improvements for herself. CODA is fantastic for domestic victims, as well as obsessive helicopter parents or anyone with codependency problems. I ignore them. To be honest, it's also because I'm in a different city and have a hectic job. But there was also a period of slowly getting them used to the fact that they would not know and control every detail of my adult life. I don't know if I'd say I'm an adult because I'm 19 and still in college, and does that really count? But yeah, I just ignore them. They say, do this, and I say, okay, and then I do whatever the frick I want. They've got to drive 13 hours to get to me. I can't see them paying for a plane flight. What are they going to do, call me? I can just not answer it. They said, share your location with us, and I said, no, and it was amazing. They said, give me your password so we can check your grades, and I was like, nope, I can't, it's location-based, whoops, sorry, it's not. They say, don't go out, and I just tell them I'm not going to frat parties. Meanwhile, I'm going like 3 hours away for 2 nights for a weekend trip with a whole damn frat. I tell them I wake up at 9 every day and go to sleep at 11:30 and that I eat 3 times a day. I have 4 friends that they trust that I always say that I'm hanging out with. I have a separate Insta account that they can follow so they don't see what I'm doing. I pay for my own subscriptions so they can't see what I have. I have my own credit card so they can't police what I buy, and I don't tell them when it's time to register for classes so they can't tell me what to sign up for. I made that mistake last semester. I don't tell them what finals I have when so they can't police my studying every hour. I've got 4 cream sodas in my fridge right now. My mum would flip if she found out that I drank soda. So basically, ignore them and hide things, I guess. Probably not the best habits, but you know what? I'm enjoying being able to step outside for a moment without being asked, where are you going? Or being able to talk about someone I sit next to without being asked about their family or grades. Went for a walk on campus at 6 yesterday, on my own, and no one yelled at me for it. And look, they're not cut off. I still communicate with them, but I just hide a lot, so they think my college existence is the exact same as my high school existence. And I also don't answer every single call or text from them immediately. But I call home and say hi on weekends and keep them somewhat updated on what I'm doing. And no, I'm not fully financially independent yet. I'm working on it. I'm paying for half of college. I'm high-key too scared to try and discuss boundaries while they can still hold half of my tuition over my head. Although the last author's gripes about their parents are very much valid, I know that in my previously referenced video on them, I believe a number of said parental figures insisted on breaking into their children's universities and even job interviews, so you should consider yourself lucky in that respect at least. I had to be extremely mean and blunt with my mum. I'm a mid-30s man and had to straight up tell her that I have a family and my own life, and she needs to go and get a hobby or take classes or anything whatsoever that will give her a sense of value because I don't need a gosh darn interfering invasive mother any longer. When she started giving me the, "That's so horrible that you talk to your mother that way," or the, "Oh no, my kids don't need me anymore," I literally flat out had to just say, "I don't give a crap, Mum, go work it out." I had to be super mean to her about it. Sometimes parents have to cut their children off, and sometimes children have to cut their parents off. It doesn't make me feel good, but I sleep fine. I feel ya. I moved back in with my parents in November. I'm 26, and when I moved back in, I explained to my mum that I usually go and hang out with my friends 2 to 3 times per week, and I enjoy being out of the house a lot. Still, when I come back home, I get several questions about where I was and who I was with, what I was doing, etc. It drives me insane, and I have to straight up tell her to stop questioning me. I feel bad about being so short with her, but I don't have much privacy there. My parents weren't that bad, but they were quite overprotective. After I turned 21, I still wasn't allowed out after dark and all that jazz. Had to let them know where I was going and who I was seeing in case I was murdered. What I did was move to another continent. I talk to them every couple of weeks over WhatsApp voice chat. They try and tell me what to do sometimes, and I'm just like, okay, and I don't do it. I'm white British and moved to the US when I was 24. Last I checked with them, my parents had agreed that my mum is no longer allowed out in the front garden without my dad, quote, because of all the blacks moving in. Just in case you wanted any confirmation on their sanity. The way that I got my mum to chill out on me was to tell her that I wanted to go to college out of state. That was the moment she realized she wasn't going to be protective of me forever, and it took her a long time to accept it. As of now, she's been a little easier on me, although she still sometimes treats me like a child. If I'm out of state, then I just limit contact with her and don't call home often. I think a lack of contact is the best everyone with helicopter parents can do initially, because it's just so refreshing to be by yourself with nobody breathing on your neck after so long. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My brother and I had no free time allowed growing up, just music and homework allowed. Now we're both over 30, my dad has passed away now, and he was never the problem to be honest. But my mum still does her best to control our lives, inserting herself into situations she doesn't belong in, and passively aggressively putting us in situations that she wants to happen. But cutting her off or telling her she's overstepping makes us the bad ones in her mind, so minimal contact and details are all that's left on the menu for her for now. My brother doesn't get it though and gives her the minute details of his life and then gets annoyed when she thinks she can have a say in how he lives his life. Limiting contact with my mother has worked for me as well. When I was in middle school, my friends asked if I wanted to join them, and I always had to stay home because of her migraine, etc. Because my parents are divorced, I moved in with my father and then later moved out of town. Somewhat cutting contact made her worry, and she stays on the phone for hours if I don't stop her when we talk, but it did get a lot better. My husband deals with this with his mother. We make decisions as a married couple, and then later everything changes after they talk to each other. Even situations dealing with our daughter. Like, I have no say even when he and I were on the same page before decisions were put into action. He's so desperate to please his mum that he turns his back on me. When I confront him, he blames me for causing drama or being petty. I don't know, his mum acts like she's his wife and he lets it happen. It grosses me out. I'm sorry to tell you, but this will get worse and you might only get your husband to listen to you if you persist on doing couples counseling. His behavior is putting your relationship in danger and he might need a good smack from someone else to see his wrongdoings. Don't let him step over you. Set firm boundaries with your mother-in-law and him now. Tell him to grow a spine. Do it if you're a child. Both of my parents have problems with setting boundaries with their parents, and it's unbearable. Stay strong and maybe visit the No Mill subreddit. My parents track my location at all times now. I'm 27. That way, they don't call the cops if I don't pick up within 30 minutes, which has happened multiple times. I once fell asleep on the couch and my parents couldn't get hold of me for an hour. They concluded that I hit my head in the shower and died. My parents are immigrants and only have me, so I'm not sure if that has to do with their anxiety. Stone-cold boundaries and a residence more than 1,000 miles away. This seems to be a brief summary of the majority of people's solutions to the problem. The other seems to be therapy, which to an extent requires some willingness from the parents to be open about the fact that they have a problem. And let's be honest, that might not be the case for everyone. You've got to rip that band-aid off, and it will suck. But it's better than letting this continue. I have some experience with this from rescuing both my wife and her siblings from their mother and immigrant community. It was a rescue that took years. It sucked. It still sucks sometimes. Cops, ethnic gang shenanigans, kidnapping, people with deadly weapons and attempted murder. All of that fricking happened. The only reason certain people aren't in jail is my wife forbade me from ensuring it. They're family. The advice below comes from that experience and it may not apply to all of you. I hope almost none of it does. You have to have a plan before every interaction. You'll need those plans until independence becomes a part of you. This can take years and you will probably feel like you're a horrible person for doing it. My wife still sometimes feels like the worst daughter in the world. You're not the worst. They're the worst. You deserve to be free. If you struggle with the guilt, see a therapist. They really help. If your therapist doesn't help, then get a new therapist. Every plan must have the following things in it. 1. You have a goal and stick with it. There's going to be a lot of things you want to change. And you can't change everything on day 1. Keep it simple and don't bend your goal. Don't accommodate them with any amendments. All of that is just a slippery slope right the frick back into their controlling hands. 2. Be ready to walk away. This means you shouldn't argue. You're not making a request, you're telling them how it is now. After they reject it, and they will, don't argue. Just walk away or hang up. If arguing could change anything, things would already be different for you. You can't control them, and that's actually a good, healthy thing. You need to be clear that they can't control you either. Arguing tells them that they have a chance. 3. Have a prepared consequence like, if they cause trouble, I'm just going to hang up and block their number for a couple of weeks. And 4. Expect it to go horribly. It just will. Their reactions will almost certainly be a messed-up control-freak version of the stages of grief. They will rage and they will scream. Expect this. They'll try to guilt-trick you into giving them back their control. Expect this. Follow your plan. You'll have to tell the cops to ignore them when they call about you. Expect this. Other people associated with your family might try to talk to you about the latest conflict. Expect their betrayal. Don't hate them. They're trapped in the same cultural bullcrap, just don't assume they're on your side. If you can, do not meet them in person. They have to earn it by respecting your boundaries. The first meetings will almost certainly be manipulative, sneaky, or a guilt trip plot. Expect this and remember rule number 2, walk away. Meetings may always be this way. You may want early meetings in a public place like a restaurant. If they come from a culture that does honor killing, you must consider the possibility that any attempt to meet or any sudden contact from another relative or immigrant friend of the family is actually a murder or kidnap or acid plan. And this isn't racist bullcrap, I've lived through this stuff. If you fall for it and actually go, protect yourself. Don't go alone, take a friend or two. My wife made the mistake of doing visits without me and horrible stuff happened every time. Don't repeat her mistakes. Make sure that people know where you are and that the people you're visiting know that other people know. If you're a female, this is even more important. Certain immigrant cultures see female children as family property. Your misbehavior is an embarrassment to the whole family and shames them in the community. Shame can turn to murder rage real frickin' quick, or it can simmer for months and a carefully crafted lie will lead you to a horrific end. Be paranoid, stay safe, and finally, no matter how many years have gone by, you can't visit the country they're from with them, ever. Over there, they can beat you all they want and have family and friends and culture crap to call upon to control you. This is real stuff that happens. Tricking uppity family into a visit home for a little correction is a very real thing to them. You can visit the old country, just not with them. And any visits with family over there need to be considered very carefully. The best thing to do is treat a visit like an actual vacation. Go to all of the popular vacation destinations and meet family for food somewhere once or twice, and then be on your way. Well, that was a very extreme guide on how to deal with a very specific sort of helicopter parent, along with a few other complicated cultural factors. It seems like a very stressful and time-consuming process to break someone out of this situation. I hope you and your wife and her family have found a semblance of balance and happiness. Unfortunately, the helicopter behavior continued after I got married and had children. Eventually, the only way to gain control was to go no contact. Fundamentally, it boiled down to a complete lack of respect for boundaries. My happiness, marriage, and ability to be a good parent were all suffering because my mother was still trying to control my life. We tried setting up boundaries, but that only escalated things. I would have gladly gone to family counseling if she had agreed, but it was far easier for her to complain to her friends that her children don't speak to her. And yes, my brother cut her off too. I strongly recommend the following books: Stop Walking on Eggshells by Paul Mason and Boundaries by Henry Cloud. I also very strongly recommend counseling. 1. I moved to a different country. 2. I don't go back to visit. 3. When they come visit, they stay in a hotel. And 4. My husband, who was not raised in an overbearing environment, is always present when they visit. He serves as a reality check and is effective in shutting down misbehavior. And 5. I'm going to have to explain one day that they won't be allowed unsupervised visits with any children that I have. I ended up having to remove my parents from my life, and at first it was really hard. But seriously, they've controlled every aspect of it. When I was a kid, my internet time was limited and supervised. I was allowed like an hour a day on electronics. I wasn't allowed to play any violent video games. I really only played Mario Kart. I wasn't allowed to play Pokemon because it had evolution in it. I wasn't allowed to read Harry Potter because it was magic, and magic is bad. They decided which college I went to when I was 18. They decided which degree I got. When I was struggling to find work, they pushed me to go into a field I didn't want to go to, which I'm now stuck in. When I was sick as well, it was really rare that I went to the doctor. At one point, I was dying from a bad case of pneumonia, and they refused to hospitalize me, even though I was almost dead. Quite literally. My lungs were full of fluid and my oxygen level was running at 82%. Even on oxygen, that number didn't go up. Once I moved out of my house, I started to talk to them less until last year I finally just decided to cut them off. Talking to them gave me anxiety and they always tried to steer my life in a different direction, so I figured it was better to cut them out completely. At first it was hard, but it's gotten easier over time. My mother made my bank accounts, insurances, and even my mobile phone contract when I was underage, and she just kept them. I also think she stole money from me, but that's a different story. She said I wasn't able to manage this kind of stuff by myself. With the help of my significant other, I took everything back from her when I was 26. When I visited her, she tried to pressure me into stuff again, so I threatened her that I would pack up my stuff and leave immediately, and that she would never see me or talk to me ever again in her life. Those two things were kind of wake-up calls for her. Now she's so afraid that I could really go no contact that she keeps her stupid mouth shut. What did you do that immediately got you kicked out of a job? After graduating from grad school, I was having trouble finding jobs in my chosen career. I'd ended up applying to retail jobs just to get an income. I got hired at Old Navy. I went through training and even had 1 to 2 shifts. Then I got hired in my chosen career. Great! I went and told one of my managers, who was totally cool with it and understood, and even said I might be able to stay on part-time and help out during the holidays. Cool! Next shift, I have to tell the other manager that I got a new job. I just clocked in to start work, told this manager, and she tells me I can leave. I clock back out. I wasn't even allowed to work that shift. I barely knew her, but just from the short interactions I had with her, she seemed like a total jerk. I was 21. My first real full-time job was as an apprentice in an aircraft instrument repair shop. It was a small shop, just the owner, a bookkeeper, and myself. I loved it and was really enjoying working with my hands and being around the aircraft all the time. Just as we were closing up one day, the owner got a call. A customer needed an instrument. Did we have it, and could we send it right away? We did have it, and since it was closing time, the owner told me to box up the part and label it. While I was doing that, he wrote a check to UPS and left the amount blank. He gave me the check and told me it was very important that the part get to UPS on time and to fill in the amount when I sent it. He also told me to be sure and bring back the receipt. The owner left me to lock up and take the package to UPS on the way home. I finished boxing up the part, locked up the shop, yes, he trusted me with the key, and I took the package to the UPS. When I went to the counter, the guy weighed the package, printed out a ticket which he stuck on the box, and then pitched the box onto the belt. I watched the package disappear down the conveyor and reached into my pocket for the check the owner had given me. When I looked at the check, I realized that he'd put the date and made the check payable to the UPS, left the amount blank but had also failed to sign the check. I didn't have enough cash on me to pay for the shipping. The box had already gone down the belt. The owner had stressed that this was a good customer and the part had to get there the next day. The check was already filled out to UPS, so I went ahead and wrote in the amount, $4.12, this was in 1977. I signed my boss's name on the check and handed it over to the guy behind the counter. He took the check, the package made it to the customer. The next day when I arrived at work, I immediately told my boss, the owner, what had happened. He fired me on the spot for signing his name to the check and watched me while I packed up my tools and left. One of my first jobs was working for this bucket telesales operation. We were selling long-distance plans, and they would change the fee structure and resell the same plan under a different name to the same customers. I went 1 week top of the sales chart, got a weekly bonus, and next week I was in the bottom numbers. This was the second or third week out of the training program as well. Ranking came out and they pulled me into the office and canned me for poor performance. I always thought it was because I walked in on them pulling names and numbers from different state phone books. They didn't have my final check ready that day. Next Monday, when I called in to make sure they had it, someone I didn't recognize answered, but told me to come down for my check. It turns out they got raided for that whole scammy plan bit. I had a brief interview with an FBI agent, and they handed me my final check, and the place got closed down. Apparently, I missed out on a whole crazy entry scene when the feds came in the front and the back to grab the management team. I think you missed one of the more satisfying things it's possible to witness in life, and one that we all wish we could see. Seeing a crappy boss get cuffed and pushed out of the building into a waiting armored truck. The rest of us have to settle for dreaming that about our high school fast food jobs. I got fired from Borders because the person that was covering for me while I was on vacation got fired. What's even more messed up, I didn't even find out directly from them. Jose's girlfriend, she also worked there, texted me saying, "Hey, Jose got fired and you should probably call them because they've been expecting you." I called and the store manager was like, "Yeah, you're terminated. You can come in and pick up your last check." I didn't even bother arguing because I was going to give my 2 weeks notice when I got back anyway, because I was sick of their bullcrap. Joke's on them, they went out of business. As a backpacker in Australia around 2005 or 2006, I got a job working for a motivational speaker and life coach who was also a predatory fraudster. Basically, people would come to his free session on a Saturday and then, if they were interested, they'd leave their number for people like me to call them back and try to sell the paid weekend to them. Our script included things like how to advise people who said they couldn't afford it on how they could use their social welfare payments to pay for it. Really scummy. Anyway, on one call, a guy straight up asks me if this fellow was a fraud. And I said, "Between you and me, I think he is." Just as the supervisor walked past. She tapped me on the shoulder and whispered, "Make your last call," hung up and left. Really wish I could remember his name. Michael something. Scumbag. And we were in the main dressing room all week, but had to leave on the weekend because Alice Cooper was playing and needed the dressing room. We were moved to the hospitality suite near the stage, so we were trying to sell this bullcrap course with Alice Cooper blasting out in the background. Worked in a stockroom of a large, cheap clothing company. I was around 15 or 16. It was the most boring, mind-killing job involving moving boxes, unpacking boxes, unloading trucks, packaging boxes, boxes, and more boxes. It was mostly teenagers working to earn some pocket money. You try to make the shift go faster. I brought my MP3 player one day so I could listen to some music through headphones, but that wasn't allowed. So the intercom radio kept playing the same songs over and over. I think it was Scissor Sisters, I Don't Feel Like Dancing, and James Morrison, You Give Me Something. Anyways, one early Saturday morning shift I was working with a colleague my age. We had to unpack a load of carts with boxes. You know how kids are, we started messing around, throwing the boxes to each other like volleyballs. A manager came by and sent us to his office. We were told to leave and to not come back. That was actually a good day. I worked there for 3 months and I hated every second of it. Operations manager here. On the day of the Christmas dinner for the company, I texted one of the new employees who didn't show up at the restaurant we were having dinner at. This employee was with us for 2 months and was hired even after having bad reviews from previous employers, but still thought I'd give him a chance because we were in a pinch. His previous employer said he had issues getting to work or getting to work on time. He had no driver's license, so I asked one of the other employees with the company vehicle to pick him up in the morning, and sometimes he literally had to be woken up. Circling back to the day of the Christmas dinner, he replied saying that he'll need roughly a 38% raise from his current salary, otherwise he's quitting, because this other company offered him a job. I thanked him for his time with us and enjoyed the rest of my evening. A couple of months later, he called begging for his job back, and you all know what my answer was. One year, I was working at a summer camp. It was my first year, but a bunch of people had been going for years. This year, it was a brand new director, and she was useless, regularly telling us she was too busy to do her job. Often told us that if she did the hiring, she would have gotten better employees. Told people that we can't get mad at kids and needed to use positive reinforcement. Then, when they got in trouble, just took them away and did nothing. Completely useless woman. There was one incident the day before this where one kid got 3 fingers like claws and scratched another while transitioning to the afternoon care, when the day staff were supposed to go to the office and plan activities for the next day. We were all inside when this happened, and so was the director who was actually supposed to be helping outside. Our director and regional manager came out the next day and gave written warnings to a bunch of people for being inside during our planning time. One of the 4 guys working at our camp, 37 employees and 4 were male, including me, stood up and said it was crap that we got written warnings for doing what we were told during training. But they didn't care, they wanted a scapegoat. He got angry and got fired on the spot for speaking up against our director, who was fired 3 weeks later for sucking at her job. In high school, my friend, whose nickname was the most common term for green herb we know, was scratching his package with his hand down the inside of his pants while flipping burgers at McDonald's. The owner stepped around the corner, saw him, and fired him in seconds. Are you telling me that's all it would have taken for me to get out of my fast food jobs? Oh, who am I kidding? That small-town food court restaurant would have had to actually catch me biblically desecrating the food before they'd go through the effort of finding a new staff member. Not me, but I witnessed it. Guy not only fired, but they had cops on site to escort him out. He was let go for a multitude of reasons. 1. Clocked in via phone, proceeds to show up 1 hour after his shift starts, and then leaves 1 hour early and clocks out via his phone again. 2. New access codes to vending machines, so he was stealing change out of them. Not all of it, but enough for discrepancies to be noticed. 3. Put paper towels on light bulbs in the bathroom. Stuffed paper towels down sink in break room so that he could be the hero who noticed the stuff prior to it causing a disaster. 4. General disrespect for his fellow employees. 5. Taking care of lax overtime policies and not actually working the overtime. This just happened. I was working for a small startup with an absolute C-word of a boss. He'd yell, demand 110% from his employees while he could barely afford to pay us. Paychecks were never on time, and he'd constantly demean me. He was an all-around misogynist. I talked back one time, when he asked me, "How often are you on time to work?" and I responded, "How often do we get paid on time?" And the next day he texted me to bring my keycard and keys to work and fired me. Good riddance. I've never felt better. It seriously felt like I was released from prison. I saw someone get fired on the spot because he said he wanted to rage F a co-worker of ours. He was an idiot. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I got someone fired on the spot. As a kid, I went to the library on my bike and it got stolen. Months later, I saw it in the back of a friendly's near the employee parking. I called the police since I'd already filed a report with them. Easy to identify since it had some pretty unique features, like a custom valve cap I found once, and the handbrake on the left side didn't work. Police asked the manager if he knew who came in on the bike, and he said it was one of the cooks. They informed him it was stolen from me, so the manager called him over and berated him pretty badly while they put cuffs on him and promised to call all the other local restaurants so they wouldn't hire him either. Pretty sure he said, "I knew you were a fricking loser, but stealing a kid's bike? Really? You're 25, you prick." I think he ended up getting community service. I was already quitting. I put in my 30 days when working for an IT consulting firm, while I was allocated to work in a financial institution. I hated it there. I'd been there for 3 months, but I'd been working for the consulting firm for 1.5 years, and I got a much better offer to move up to project management, which was an amazing step for me. The financial institution was notified that I'd put in my 30 days during my lunch hour by the consulting firm. I was told I could leave when I came back from lunch. The consulting firm let me go as well, since they wouldn't need me for anything else just for those 30 days. Which was cool. I called my new boss and he told me I could start sooner if I wanted to. Took a 1-week vacation between jobs and then I started. I worked in a medical office, trying to be vague about the specialty, and the doctor was doing horrifically illegal things that were putting patients at risk for damages and disease. Things like having an unlicensed employee performing duties that they shouldn't be and not practicing proper hand washing or instrument sterilization, among other things. Not to mention the doctor was rude and would frequently yell at staff. During my employment, I brought attention to things that were being done and confronted the doctor in front of the rest of the staff. She fired me on the spot. I'd been keeping record of infractions as they were revealed, and a lot of the more awful things that were hush-hush, and I turned them into the office of the Attorney General in my state. Just a few weeks ago, I found out that the doctor has been telling people that I was fired for trying to recruit people into a cult. I'm an atheist. My job had people come and go like it was a drive-through. We had one guy who was down that same path. He came in and started cutting the pizzas. I was helping him and he was a nice guy. Skip forward a couple of weeks and this guy is a master. Even during rush, he still has time to pick up orders. The manager comes in and asks him how he's liking his job. He says that he's glad he works there. Manager fires him on the spot. We get a new guy in and the cycle continues. I was working in a USPS priority shipping center during Christmas break from college back in 2002. It's fairly brutal work, tossing packages non-stop for an entire 8-hour shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. I know, it's not a gulag or anything, but to a spoiled 20-year-old at the time, I recall hating it. So there's this massive conveyor belt structure that basically runs the entire length of this titanic warehouse. It's huge, kid, and they would store a ton of carts and other miscellaneous junk under there for storage. So naturally, I took to hiding out underneath it whenever the opportunity arrived. Pretty shifty thing to do, but alas, I was young and foolish. This went on for a good week when I decided to get bold and took to laying down inside a pushcart and covered myself up for what I'd hoped would be a brief nap. It's loud and a little cold, so I thought I'd be good. But nope. Slept for a good 4 hours only to awaken to a search party sent out to see if I'd died under the belt. The boss applauded my bold action but showed me the door all the same. Haha, pretty cool boss to actually credit you on getting out of your crappy job even as he gave you the boot. Sounds like he probably understood it wasn't a fun place to be. Not all antagonists are mean. At a place where I worked, people came to me saying someone was making creepy comments about my body, and they'd told HR about it. So when I got called in, I said, well, yeah, that makes me uncomfortable. And the person got fired on the spot. It was a huge deal because everyone knew about it. I'd only been working there for a little less than a year, and they'd been there for over 10. Almost a decade ago, I was in my apprenticeship to become an electrical planner. I'm Swiss. Over here, your first apprenticeship is very important, and it's hard to get any job at all if you don't have at least one apprenticeship done. As a result, there was big pressure in my last year of school to get a place. Initially, I wanted to do computer technician, but I just couldn't land a hit, so I had to start looking into other jobs. Eventually, I landed a job as an aforementioned planner. Let's not mince words. Not only did I hate the actual work right away, I also hated my boss, and most of my co-workers. Initially, I just thought I would soldier my way through. Finishing your first apprenticeship is so important. I managed a little more than a year before I started to get depressed, to the point that my parents were starting to notice and my mother got on my case. I started missing work. I had a doctor that was very liberal in handing out a sick notice for 1 to 2 weeks straight. So I'd work for a month or so, miss like 10 days of work, and then work another month or so. My grades started to drop and I actually started to give my boss and co-workers lip for being so crappy to me. For context, I was a glorified maid. Every morning I had to take a 20-minute trip to the local bakery and get everyone their foodstuffs for the break. I frequently got shouted at if the stuff they wanted was already sold out. Well, why didn't you leave earlier? Because I'm already leaving almost an hour before the break actually starts, and then people would complain that the stuff wasn't warm anymore. Then twice a day I had to make coffee for everyone. They'd frequently change their mind on the order and then berate me for screwing stuff up. Often they'd complain even if I did exactly as they asked. You put too much sugar in. No, you just can't properly decide on how much you want. You asked for 3 and I put in 3. And probably the most offensive, I just couldn't do anything right. I was an apprentice. I earned maybe 1/10 of what the others made. And part of that deal is that you're allowed to screw up and then taught how to do it properly. No such luck, I was basically required to learn everything by myself or Google it, and then I'd get 60-minute sessions of beratement for not doing the work properly. The final straw was on a Friday. I had to leave around 4 p.m. at the latest so I could catch my train home. So I started cleaning everything at around 3 p.m. 5 minutes before I planned to leave, I just finished cleaning the office floor, whereafter one of my co-workers walks in wearing muddy and snowy shoes. It was February, I think, ruining the entire floor all over again. I packed my stuff. The boss came in and demanded I stay to clean up. I don't remember my exact words, but it was said very loudly and would probably get me banned from most places online if I put it in the story. When I came back on Monday, my boss told me to get out immediately. I remember laughing the whole way home. I was free. Probably one of the best days of my teenage life. Joke's on him anyway. I still had a bunch of stuff I was supposed to bring to the post office in my backpack. Held on to it for a few weeks in case they asked for it, and then ritually burnt it in the hopes of some elder god smiting the office. It didn't happen, but it was satisfying nonetheless. Not me, but my coworker at Subway got fired after giving her friend free food and paying for it immediately afterwards. Perfect. This just happened to me in September. I was a marketing manager at a fairly large digital advertising agency. I showed up to work on Wednesday at the same time I always did. Nothing out of the ordinary. My direct manager from the office up north was in for a strategy meeting. He and I sat down with my team and did some Q2 number reviews, goal setting, strategy for the remainder of 2018, talked about the pros and cons and how hopeful and optimistic he was. Then it was back to work as usual. About 2 hours later, he calls me into the conference room. I bring my laptop to take notes and figure we're going to go over more numbers or something. I look to my right at the end of the long conference room table, and the SVP of operations was sitting there, albeit with an uncomfortable, scared look on his face. They tell me to close the door. My manager said, "We've decided today is your last day." Didn't really give me any good reason why, but I found out it was a few days before earnings call and they'd missed their projected quarter numbers, and I was the most expensive employee on the team. I didn't push the crappy store credit cards enough. I was pulled off the till by a manager and he asked why I didn't try to sign the customer up for a card. He was watching us. I told them the customers don't want them, or should we push them? I'm sure if they want them, they'll ask. I was pulled into the office and fired or, quote, laid off because they didn't need extra staff, and that I was a problem child, as he worded it, because screw actual customer service and making sure the store doesn't look like a war zone. Look who's laughing now, Sears. This was 7 years ago. 6 months was way too long to work at a crap place like that. They destroyed themselves. I'm glad so many others have the same opinion. They preyed on people who didn't understand credit terms, who had bad credit, or were new to the country. How can you sign someone up so quickly for a crazy high-interest card and have a conscience? Daily, we had people coming to the register with bills not knowing what they were getting billed for, or totally confused by the card and getting angry by the high interest and card fees. I was told by management when I was fired that in 6 months I'd only signed up or did applications for 3 people, when it should have been closer to 1,300. Yes, 1,300. Even though so many of my shifts were before store hours doing price changes or cleaning. The store could look like a bomb went off and they'd rather push crappy cards. I got in trouble because I spent so much time helping customers and cleaning up the clothing. Yes, for things most stores require. My mum, brother and I were at Olive Garden about 20 years ago. We had the worst waiter in the history of the world. He was outrageously rude to the point of being downright mean to us. At the end of the dinner, my mum left him a dime for a tip, and as we were leaving, the waiter threw the dime at my mum. I was a little kid, otherwise I probably would have at least attempted to defend her. The waiter's boss saw the dime throw and fired the waiter on the spot. Everyone has a bad day, but that guy was just awful. What's the most nobody knows job that pays really good amounts of money? Nuclear divers. They make repairs in nuclear reactors. It's actually not very dangerous if you don't do it a lot. Water is a very good shield against radiation, and the divers receive a relatively small dose if you compare it to the background radiation we all get during a year of just living our lives. You only have to work once every few months because of the amount of radiation you receive, and you can make up to $100,000 per year. Tube operators. Tube is in the British subway. Because the job is so depressing, whoever takes on the job actually gets paid quite a decent amount. However, the conditions are actually awful. Underground means not much lighting. The air is stuffy and there is no one to talk to. You can make a good amount of money and you don't have to talk to people? I'm currently applying for British citizenship. Unfortunately, you'll have to start as a station attendant or something similar. Driver is the top of the transport for London career ladders. You get paid pretty well, like £60,000 per year, but that's as high as you can go. Plus, there's always the chance some poor human being will jump in front of your train. As far as part-time work, I work valet and make around $30 per hour on average. It's a ton when it's literally the easiest job in the world. Shut off your brain and run for cars. The timpanist, or kettle drummer of the orchestra, gets paid really well. Only the first violin gets paid more. It turns out that keeping those kettle drums tuned requires an enormous amount of skill. Maybe this is common knowledge, but I just learnt that UPS drivers get compensated pretty well. I've got a friend who's a UPS driver. Can confirm the pay is decent, but he works his butt off. Loads of vacation as well. The catch? It's somewhat like the career of a professional athlete. Big money while you're doing it, but it won't last forever. Old UPS drivers are extremely rare. An important thing to keep in mind with all these jobs is that you should also say where you are. Cost of living is a thing. The worrisome part is that people forget about this in real life too. I have a relative who used to hire people for a government bureau in DC. He said there was no shortage of people who thought they were going to be making bank for an entry-level position based on the salary, and not considering that $75K in DC is not the same as $75K in their small hometown or college town. This is very true. Where I live, that's a lot, but inner city New York? No way, Jose, you'd be living hand to mouth on that. College girlfriend's parents both played in a major city orchestra and got paid more than $100K. Both had PhDs in music. My dad is a physician and my mum is a nurse anesthetist, a job which pays just as much as lots of doctors make, and many don't know it. Just take a master's. Specialist welders. My brother in the southeast makes $250,000 plus to do welding on nuclear projects. He has to have security clearance and a bunch of unique training. He works ridiculous hours in spurts, but has a lot of downtime when a project is either being treated or he's waiting on some special metal to arrive. I've heard of underwater welders making similar money, but they have to live on a rig and most of it is really just hazard pay. Underwater welding is super dangerous and bad for your body. You get paid well because you usually die before you reach 60 because of being exposed to hazardous chemicals. Celebrity dog walker. Technically not no one knows and more of a no one notices job. I'm from Singapore and my uncle sells Hainanese chicken rice as a hawker at $2.50 a plate. Even though the working conditions look rough, he rakes in more than $150K a year. Wow. Might consider taking over his business if I flunk university. Some people are questioning these figures. Well, I'd say that his stall is rather popular and manages to sell about a couple of hundred plates during the lunch and dinner crowd. He works through weekends too, where he gets most of the business. I'm amazed at how much you guys are interested in knowing more about Singapore and where the stall is. Well, Singapore does have a high cost of living, if you're talking about housing and cars, but $150K is definitely enough for you to lead a comfortable life. Although, as some of you have correctly pointed out, his working hours are madness. He wakes up at 4 a.m. every single day to prepare the chicken, the rice, and to set up his stall, and goes home at around 11 p.m. He can't hire workers as well, because he has to protect his recipe. Tech for events. The grunts do okay, but the guys with any skill do well. Corporate events pay better, but concerts don't build themselves. Like anywhere, you'll run into cheap employers. This is a red flag. You might not get paid at all. Avoid these buttholes. There are plenty of gigs that pay well on time. Ask your entertainment union what skills they pay the most for and what they need most. It won't be steady for a while, but get your name out there. If you want a company gig, ask which companies they'd work for if they wanted that sort of gig. You'll learn a lot from what they say, regardless of what you choose to do. Right now, I'm making $60 an hour to scratch my butt. Nothing next week, but that's okay with me. Every job done on a cruiser or a trading vessel will be paid far more than the same job on land. Plus, you don't have to spend any money. I've never met a cruise ship employee that looked happy. They all had the fake Disney smiles going on. Except the entertainment. Those guys spend like 90% of the time hitting on women at the bar. Do cruise ships need IT? I should be more specific. I'm not looking to go back into desktop support. I was thinking more systems administration, which is what I do now. Surprisingly, yeah. Modern cruise ships have a pretty extensive IT infrastructure, and it has all the same problems as on land with the unique problems of being on sea for days at a time. Be aware that it's a pretty grim job at times, since you're sometimes tracing down cabling through conduits that you can often find dead rats in, or some horrible slime that seems to accumulate in places on cruise ships, where they never seem to actually get washed or painted. I've never done the at-sea job, but I did a lot of consulting work on infrastructure upgrades on some cruise ships many years ago. I talked to the onboard IT guys and they told me some horror stories. And to be honest, the IT stuff seems to be the exception to the rule set beforehand. The pay isn't actually any better than on land and is often worse. The free food and cheap drinks are still okay, but bear in mind that you're on call all the time while the ship's at sea. And when in port, you'll rarely, if ever, get on land. You'll also become the de facto desktop support for the rest of the crew and often the passengers. It's also worth noting that they're mostly looking for more entry-level people for the onboard crew. They rely mostly on consultants to build properly redundant systems that'll survive at sea, and when it breaks, they'll switch to the redundant backup and leave the failed hardware and systems until they get back to shore and can get a consultant to come back on board to fix it. And bear in mind that my experience was some years ago. I know even then they were looking to outsource as much of their IT as possible, and so these days it's likely IT on a cruise ship is heavily outsourced. I've heard you can make some pretty crazy money working on oil rigs. The hours are insane, you have to leave home for a while and the job sucks, but apparently you can make a killing doing it. Yeah, but dying can also be a problem there. I mean, done deal, sign me up. Oh, you poor phlegmatic and passionless people crack me up. However, I can't imagine any fate on one of those things would be entirely pain-free. Industrial accident or dying in a fire is a lose in my books. Being a court reporter pays extremely well. I live in Texas. The salaries for court reporters here average $75K and up, including retirement and paid vacation time. Even as a freelance deposition reporter, you can make upwards of $100K if you put in the time. It's definitely a skill though. You need to have a strong command of the English language. The theory behind writing on steno machines is also incredibly unique. You will need to be able to alter your normal ways of spelling to be able to write correctly. In Texas, there is a state certification that must be passed before you can be licensed. Texas requires you to write at a speed of 225 strokes per minute for at least 5 minutes. The test is definitely a huge barrier for a lot of people to get licensed. People who clean up crime and accident scenes. Someone shot themselves in the head in your house? Old lady died and wasn't found for a few weeks? The medical examiner and emergency teams will come and take the body, but all of that blood, leaked fluid, bits of crap, and complete nastiness, yep, that's on you to deal with. Enter people who clean up scenes like this for a living, and they can charge whatever they want, because can you really put a price on not having to deal with that mess yourself? Elevator tradesman. An older brother of a friend of mine had this job and did indeed make a very good living. The only real catch was that he was almost always on call. We'd be hanging out at like 11 PM, pounding beer and playing video games, and then the older brother would go take a leak and come back in his work jumpsuit like, "Gotta go fix an elevator, be right back." Thanks for adding the drunk elevator technicians to my list of things I worry about killing me now. Not only does it pay well, but we really need some new blood in the masonry industry. People, if you don't like school, don't go to college, learn a trade. My dad used to shoot wildlife that would stray onto airport runways, and he was on about $65K a year if I recall correctly. A buddy of mine did that. They replaced him with a falcon. Sales professional at a luxury retail store. I worked at a jewelry store in Las Vegas making over $100K a year and being under 30 years old. If you're with the right company and in the right city, commission is limitless. Being in the right location for the right brand is also important here. Though both would technically be luxury jewelry salespeople, there's a difference between working at a major brand in or near a major city versus working at a K Jewelers in a strip mall near a sleepy suburban town. The sexton of a church who gets paid a substantial salary, with benefits and pension, to ring the steeple bells on the hour. Between bell-ringing sessions, he polishes the brass in the church and gets it ready for funerals, weddings, and weekend services. But most of the time, he acts as a tour guide for those visiting the building on weekdays who want to see the church's original Tiffany stained glass windows. Some people put down trade jobs such as plumbing, welder, etc. because they don't require a college degree. After completing trade school, and if you're accepted into a union, you can make more than a decent amount of money and have great benefits to go with it. There are more alternatives than college where you can make a living for yourself, and getting a trade is a great alternative. On top of getting a good job, you also avoid the student debt. Be aware that some occupations are tough on the body. You may not like it so much after kneeling on roofs for 20 years. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Health economist. The field of health economics didn't really take off until the late 90s, and it's booming as of today. OECD countries are starting to realize they need more efficient ways to manage and organize their healthcare systems. Countries like Italy are still at ground zero when it comes to economic evaluation of medication or technologies, diagnostic tests, treatments, among other things. The prime example is the UK, which has a completely separate body called NICE to carry out evaluations for the NHS. People with a master's or PhD in health economics are in massive shortage and wanted by pretty much every international organization or technological consultancy or government body, and of course, by pharmaceutical companies as well, and they're paid very, very well. My source? I'm a health economist working for a major international organization. Driving a commuter train in Toronto, Canada, pays $80,000 a year. I mean, you can be high on white snow, you just have to watch your speed. Seems about as good a time as any to remind everyone that any advice given out in these videos is generally free speech compliance stories submitted via the internet. Personally, the narrator does not recommend working any sort of machinery, let alone commuter vehicles, while doing that or any other substance. My father is a welder and has done work as a plumbing assistant. He's always worked factory or machine operator type jobs, but he always had a steady side gig by doing welding and fabricating on the side out of his backyard shop. When he'd get laid off, as is common in factory work, he'd just ramp up the welding to full-time. When I needed veneers for my teeth as a preteen due to staining from medication I had to take as a child, the insurance deemed it as cosmetic and wouldn't pay. It was $900 a tooth and I needed 4 of them. He made the money in 2 months out of the backyard shop. I don't have a college degree, but I make around $70K in Wisconsin. Industrial inspection, NDE or NDT, mostly checking high-pressure welds with X-ray, magnetics, etc. Downside is the hours. I'll end up working around 80 this week, and you don't always know your schedule, but it's alright for a mid-20s guy without kids or too many responsibilities. Took me about 2.5 years to get to this level. Started around $13 an hour and now around 25. Company paid for me to go to class and get my certifications, which is how you get the raises. I was a merchandise roadie. Upfront pay was between $100 to $200 a day. My per diem was $6 to $20 a day. International travel was free. Our accommodation in hotels and tour bus bunks were free as well, and you could rent a place anywhere you like because it's not like you're commuting. Travel from your location to the starting point of the tour is usually free, though living within an hour of the capital city helped me get work, as a lot of tours started there. Food was free. Alcohol was also free. You had to pay for your own substances, though, unless you were a hot girl. Riding around with bands on tour buses, accruing stories and seeing the world, hard labor every day. Your job is sometimes excruciatingly hectic. I was once in Cologne and sold 13,000 euros worth of 3 Doors Down t-shirts in one night on my own. But in a sense, free. I toured with Adele 3 times, LaRue 3 times, Lenny Kravitz, Interpol, Red Hot Chili Peppers, and tons more. Smaller acts were way more fun, especially metal bands, but nobody gets excited when you say you toured with AmITheA for 2 months. God, that was the best part. Between the ages of 19 and 27, I toured constantly until I gave it up to make an animated series. Now I'm 30 and we're about to start pitching a new pilot. Pipe fitters. Sort of a different version of an HVAC R-Tech, primarily focusing on industrial and commercial. In Colorado, a good pipe fitter can make $75K a year before any overtime, by the time they're 22 or 23. That's with basically no student debt accrued. It's a job that's always in demand too. It can be a tough job, but you'll never hurt for work. No idea if this is true or not, but when I was in the army, we were told that parachute riggers, the people who pack parachutes, work by just having a certain quota of chutes they have to pack per day. Apparently it's a very boring task, and the longer they keep going, the more likely a mistake will be made. Because of this, the guys who've been doing it for years and are really good at it complete their quota for the day in about 2 or 3 hours, so they're home every day by 11. I know a guy who's an emergency medical technician for an overnight shift at an oil rig in Alaska, I believe. He sits on Path of Exile all night in his trailer with Wi-Fi and a laptop. He's been working for 2 years and has had 3 calls, one of which was only a bear walking around in the vicinity of the outer fence. Makes about $200,000 a year. Repairing equipment in a clean room. No education necessary. Very rare to see a tech with a degree. The clean room is kept at 65 degrees Fahrenheit, you're wearing a full suit over your street clothes, and everything you work on requires gloves, so your hands stay dirt and callus-free. Don't tell my boss, but the job is actually fun. I'm sitting right now with my co-workers and I read them this question. We all agree our job as independent insurance adjusters should be added to this. We're currently working auto flood claims for cars damaged from Hurricane Matthew. Our pay rate is $39 an hour and $58.50 overtime per hour. Anything over 40 hours is overtime, by the way. We're working 7 days a week, 11 hours a day, so it's very lucrative. There is travel involved and you never know how long any particular deployment will last, but I recently finished up a 2-year deployment, working a desk job making a similar rate, although that was only 6 days a week. I crap you not, a professional determining whether a young chicken is a male or female can earn $60K a year. At least according to an article I was reading in Business Insider a while back, so take that for what it is. I mean, that's not retire early money, but I think it's crazy high for feeling chicken bits for a living. Actuaries. Not truly no one knows per se, but a lot of people aren't really aware of them. Let me save you some time. The examinations are brutal, you'll cry and hate yourself unless you're a masochist who loves numbers. As a student taking these exams currently, I can concur. There are so many and they will continually get more difficult. The narrator has just read up on what this is, and no thank you. Being slaughtered in school and then subject to lawsuits when you inevitably fail to predict market upheaval sounds like it's not worth it in my book. Working on a billionaire's yacht. They don't drive, cook, or clean or serve themselves. I have a friend whose father is British and his mother is Japanese. He grew up in China for most of his life, but spent a few years in America and some in Japan. He's naturally fluent in Japanese, Chinese, and English. He works for some Chinese company and is essentially the assistant for any big-name people who travel for business. His salary isn't anything incredible, like $75K, but he sometimes goes weeks without working, and when he travels with them, he's treated as an equal and gets to eat and drink at some of the finest restaurants in the world and stays in amazing hotels. Radiologist. Most people don't know what we really do or our contribution to their care, so much so that the American College of Radiology put out a campaign, Face of Radiology. A white guy can pretty much go to China and get paid to be a white guy, either teaching English, no teaching experience required, just need to speak English, or being paid to sit in on business meetings pretending to be an American investor. Giant crane operators make tons of money. Even small crane operators can do pretty well. Being a flight attendant for one of the good international airlines. My friend works for Emirates, and it's pretty much the ideal job for someone without a family. The salary is awesome, you only work about 14 days a month, you travel the world for free and enjoy mini vacations wherever you go, stay in 5-star hotels for free, get set up in a luxury apartment in Dubai for free, get discounts on international flights for you and your family, among other things. They had a yearly open call where everyone who fits the requirements can apply. They usually make announcements on their website and Facebook page. That's how she got in. They're pretty picky though. If you pass the initial screening, you have to get through a series of interviews that get more and more selective each round, so only a handful of people get the job in the end. Anesthesiologist's assistant. They work under the direction of licensed anesthesiologists, specialist physicians, and as part of the anesthesia care team. They start at $120K and move up to $160K per year. Custom cabinetry construction. On average, assuming the craftsman already has the tools on hand and knows how to make boxes already, the cost of custom making the average plywood kitchen cabinetry set, top and bottom cabinets including all wood, stains, handles and screws, not including countertop, runs about $700 to $900 in material costs, not including the labor. However, due to making the doors custom, they can charge upwards of $20 to $50K for a few days of work. There's a lot more to it, but the actual material and skill cost for making a bunch of boxes is way lower than what the average homeowner is being charged for custom kitchen cabinetry. Plus, there's a crazy huge demand for custom kitchens due to HGTV. Every middle-aged housewife wants a wine fridge. A guy used to pay me $30 an hour to cremate bodies. It's easy and I just listened to music the whole time. Kinda cliche, but I had death metal on full blast while burning bodies. Pretty cool to be honest. After working in an office setting for my entire life, I've deduced that the money has to be amazing for printer, copier, and fax machine repair people. A never-ending list of work and overtime from what I can see. I'm convinced that there's an unwritten code that requires them to leave the machine in worse condition than what they found it in. Supply chain pays well and isn't overflowing with applicants. Most people at universities have no clue this major exists. I'm a college recruiter and sometimes struggle to find qualified supply chain candidates. The reason no one at universities knows it exists is because you don't need a degree to get into it. Can you handle a project and its components from cradle to grave? Can you properly maintain an inventory to support the project? Can you keep it within, or better yet, under budget? Congrats, you're winning at supply chain. My source? 5 years in supply chain management with a defense contractor. No degree or previous experience. Got no gag reflex? Enjoy other people's number twos? Have your scuba certification? Become a construction diver. Make $10,000 to dive into wetted structures at the wastewater treatment plant. You're usually done in about 4 hours. Well, 6 if you count the shower. It's a tough job to find, but being a technical writer for imported things. My job was to take the directions included with the Chinese-made DIY furniture, which were in horribly translated English, and rewrite them to make sense to the average English speaker. I did it informally and got a couple of grand per assignment, but the company I did it for went out of business, and I wouldn't even know where to look for that kind of job again. I found it through a relative the first time. What's a toxic behavior disguised as a virtue? Mum says several people on her Facebook are angry that they were told their services weren't needed when they signed up to town's volunteer services to help folk during the crisis. We had an amazing number of people come forward. They're mad because they want to help and do their bit. And honestly, she realized so many of them are the ones who do charity drives and stuff like that, just to show off how much of a #good person they are, and to have others praise them for being a #good person. The ones we know who are helping are getting on and doing it. Odd picture or post, but certainly not what these people would be doing. This weirdly applies to the service industry as well. People will literally throw tips at a barista to prove that they're a #good person after just belittling us. They get angry when we say at our store we can't accept tips, because how are they supposed to get that good person fix now? It's so weird and gross. The opposite of this also exists. There are people who crap on others for genuinely just trying to do the right thing and claim that they just do it to seem like a good person. Especially on the internet, the terms SJW, white knight, or simp have lost all meaning due to this. Supporting a person to a fault. In other words, being an enabler. Especially when they call it loyalty. People will defend the most effed up crap from their friends and be like, "I'm loyal." Like, no, call out your friends for being crap when they are. When people get involved in and regulate other people's relationships, they try to act like they're helping, but they always make it worse. Grand romantic gestures. I teach high school, and it's crazy how many times you see a kid basically bully their crush into being with them. They make this huge public display, and the kid is too shy to say no in front of everyone. It's embarrassing and distressing for that poor kid. I had a guy surprise me with a date. He lied and said our friends would be there. It was just him, me, and a horror movie. He brought me a necklace and chocolates. If we'd actually been dating, it might have been a nice romantic gesture. We weren't. We were barely friends. Hollywood can definitely warp the ideas of boundaries and consent. I can't see that working in this day and age. Or maybe it never worked in the first place, I'm not sure. I do know that if anyone tried it on me, I would be mortified, he says, beating off hordes of imaginary admirers with a stick. Overstudying, overburdening, and excessive academic anxiety and self-doubt does not make for a dedicated pupil, but an unbalanced and miserable human being instead. This is so common in Asia, the whole competitive environment of those studying more and getting better grades. Was watching a YouTuber earlier talk about how journaling during quarantine has helped him get through some old traumas, and he said one of the issues that it brought up was this. It was really jarring for me to hear that he's basically got PTSD from exam taking and Asian study culture. If the YouTuber didn't mention, or just if you haven't heard, I'd urge you to look up just how important tests in Asian countries can be. Anything from bribing police to ignore cheating, to parents climbing buildings to help their kids cheat. It's honestly unbelievable, and I can 100% imagine that stress seriously affecting someone. People saying that they did stuff that directly affects us without our permission for looking after your best interests. I have a similar neighbor. His thing is speed limits. He stands at the edge of his driveway shouting at cars that he thinks are going too fast. He makes his own unofficial speed limit signs, and he complains to each neighbor about how all the other neighbors ignore him. My neighbor really just needs a cause to fill his time. I wish he'd take up needlepoint or model ships. Self-sacrifice. Sometimes, sacrificing some of your time and energy is important. But you've got to remember that if someone or something is important to you, it doesn't mean you should cut pieces off yourself or burn yourself out for it. It goes double for if you're caring for someone. If that something or someone is that important to you, you need to make sure that the support you're giving remains consistent and sustainable and doesn't take you out. We often forget that in many cases, when you're caring for someone, that person's well-being is also tied to your well-being. And if your well-being suffers, that person you're caring for will suffer as well. And if they're worth caring for, they'll notice that you're suffering, and it won't be great for them either. The workaholic. It's fine to work hard at something you love, but not at the expense of everything else. Especially if you use it to put down everyone else who knows how to set boundaries. Teacher culture is like this so much. I know we lack a lot of supplies, but I've got 3 kids. I don't have $500 to spend at Target at the beginning of the year, and 3 days to come in and decorate my room to the perfect school colors. I leave at the end of the contract time, and I work from home after the kids go to bed. But since the others don't see me stay at school until 7 or 8, apparently I'm not working. If you don't sponsor clubs for nothing and work yourself to the bone, you're not a good teacher, apparently. My test scores are phenomenal, but I get so much crap for not volunteering to chaperone a dance. Persistence in relationships. It's always sold in rom-coms and in relationships, but usually your persistence is a complete lack of respect for other people's boundaries or holding on to things that aren't working out. When you tell people how you're feeling, to vent, or when they ask how you're doing in general, and then they one-up you to make you feel like you don't get to feel tired or sad or stressed because they are clearly having a harder time of it than you are. I was tired from school and work one day, and I told my old roommate that I was feeling a little tired. And he hits me with, "Oh, you're tired? I only had 5 hours of sleep and I had to wake up early this morning because I had PT. He's in the Reserve Officers Training Corps. People that do good deeds so that they can brag about it or use it to their own advantage. Look at me, I'm such a good person. I do all these nice things. Not because I wanted to be a good person or anything. Nope, just so I could tell everyone about all the good things I do. Repeatedly. Like all the time. Because I'm a good person, remember? Hey, by the way, could you do me a favor?" Telling kids that they're so different than anyone else while implying that they're somehow better. The actual healthy thing to do is just stress that everyone is unique and the kids' natural gifts make them who they are, just like other kids' gifts make them unique. Working for exposure. This one gets me because companies use it as an excuse to not pay someone or not pay them the amount they deserve. They claim exposure is your payment, but last I checked, exposure doesn't pay the bills. The entire "I have a strong personality" kind of people, and then when they follow that up with "people either love me or hate me," you know that it's heavily weighted to the hate side. My boss excuses her really crappy and just plain mean behavior as a strong personality. Nope, you're just a butthole. Yeah, I've never met a person like this where it wasn't code for "I'm heavily unpleasant to be around." Take your strong personality and use that strength to hurl yourself to a different locale, please. The rise and grind mentality, saying that if you're not working towards something, you're wasting your time. It's important to take time to relax or pursue a passion without monetary gain, but society as a whole has deemed this as wasting your time. My boss tells me he only reads inspirational self-help books to get better at sales, and that's what he wants me to read. I just tell him that the books I like are fantasy, sci-fi, and historical. I'm really not interested in some rich guy telling me how to do relationship marketing, a chapter in, and this author is just blabbling about his boating trip with his friend. For me, I don't see it as me doing certain activities that are just wasting time or would be considered pointless. Yeah, I'm not working towards making more money or improving my reputation or whatever's considered monetary gain, but you know what this activity that brings me enjoyment does work towards? My happiness and well-being. You know what you can't do when you're not mentally all in order and it's hard for you to function as a healthy human? Make monetary gains. Am I saying be lazy and always do what you want to do and always try to do something fun? No. But life isn't all about money. I don't care how much fricking money I make if I'm miserable. Family comes first. I grew up thinking that I had a very close extended family until I realized how crappy and miserable most of them were. I've cut them out and feel so much better about it. That kind of hustle culture where successful people give motivational speeches, or more often Instagram captions, where they say stuff like, "If you're not succeeding, you're not working hard enough," or "We all have the same 24 hours. We don't all have the same 24 hours. If you have kids, subtract a couple of hours. If you have kids without a live-in nanny, subtract a whole bunch of them. If you have to work minimum wage jobs to make rent, subtract hours. If you don't have help to cook or clean or grocery shop, then subtract more hours." That's part of why Kylie Jenner's whole self-made millionaire thing bugs me. Even if she came up with her own ideas and did her portion of the work, she never had to worry about financial support to start her brand, or childcare while she was working, or who was going to cook meals for her and her kid or clean her house. Her lip fillers alone, which are a huge portion of her brand, can cost up to $2,000 a pop. You're not self-made if you couldn't have done it without your parents' money. I love Arnold Schwarzenegger for part of this reason. When speaking at a graduation ceremony, he said something to the effect of the following: "I always tell people that you can call me anything you want. You can call me Arnold, you can call me Schwarzenegger, you can call me the Austrian Oak, you can call me Schwarzi, you can call me Arnie. But don't ever call me a self-made man. This is so important for you to understand. I didn't make it that far on my own. I mean, to accept the credit or that mantle would discount every single person that has helped me get here today, that gave me advice, that made an effort, that gave me time, that lifted me when I fell. It gives the wrong impressions that we can do it alone. None of us can. The whole concept of self-made man or woman is a myth. Almost no one is self-made. It's nice to be inspired and think that you can be the next big thing, but having help does go a long way. It's why people are tired of the millionaire celebrities who talk about how you just need to lace up your boots and put your time in. Meanwhile, the Paltrows of the world have nannies and chefs and personal trainers, or the Trumps of the world get a small loan of $1 million. Most common, lower or middle class people will consider it a windfall to find a sitter for an hour or two every now and then, or come into an extra $50 to make it to the next paycheck. It's hard for your average person, where you rely on each other, crash at a friend's house, ask for a quick ride somewhere, maybe $20 here and there to make it through, or ask a relative to watch the kids for an hour or two before you can make it home from work. Even then, it's not always enough. The hustle and self-made culture can be an inspiration from the right person. But when the self-made persons start crapping on people who can't make it or haven't been as lucky, it flips really quick. Humility is what's important, knowing that even if you've managed to make it with hard work and sacrifice, someone can do just as much, if not more, and still fall short. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Corporate passive-aggressive behavior. Yes, you're saying all the right things, and everything checks out if read back on a transcript, but you and I both know you've simply found a way to abuse the rules for your own gain. My last boss was like this. She'd even brag about the ways she got away with it in the past. She loved to manipulate and belittle people, and this was her favorite way of doing it. What's worse is so many people could see through it, but technically she didn't do anything wrong, so she had no consequences. Toxic positivity. Basically, people who try to find the good in everything. There's a lot to be said for having a positive outlook, but it quickly becomes toxic when you start lessening the impact of people who are awful to the ones you love. For example, I'm sure your parents still loved you in their own way. Or when you trivialize people's sadness. So you got fired. It just means you need to pursue a new opportunity. Sometimes, the appropriate answer to a situation is to just acknowledge that things suck. Sometimes, other people need to vent. They don't want a solution, they don't want you to tell them it will be alright, they just want to release the tension in their chest by venting to you, and to hear you say, yeah, that is bullcrap. And a lot of the time, whoever they choose to vent to is someone they trust and are comfortable with. I usually feel a little flattered when my friends vent to me. And if there's something you think you can help them with, wait until after they vented. Let them get it out, let it calm down, and then make the suggestion. It will always go so much better. The discovery of toxic positivity has, no joke, been a real revelation to the narrator's life in recent years. Sometimes the best thing you can do for your friend is to acknowledge that things suck and ask them questions, like what they might do next. Offer your opinion on their options if they ask, and just be there and respect their feelings. People who say, "This is just the way I am. If you can't handle that, oh well." Like, no, you're wrong. I understand to an extent that if people don't like you for being yourself, they can go F themselves, but if you're a person who seriously doesn't know how to speak to people or are just rude in general and claim, "That's just how I am," you're wrong. People need to know that it's not okay to be rude or obnoxious, and that you should be able to know the difference of being yourself and just being a jerk. Steve Jobs was Exhibit A for this. He was known for treating people like crap, and not just his employees at Apple. Waiters, hotel staff, whoever. And it wasn't because he didn't have it in him to be kind and generous, because he did turn that on when it suited him. He just chose not to care that his cruelty hurt people. Always being busy and constantly working hard. I have family members that call me lazy because I've created a life that doesn't revolve around constant grinding. Constantly being busy, getting up at the crack of dawn, always complaining about being tired, regularly talking about how there's just not enough time to do things they enjoy. All as if it's some badge of honor. Yes, this. When people talk to me about all the crap they have going on, and I'm sitting here with no girlfriend because I don't want the commitment, and extra person wrapped into my schedule, no house and no plans to buy one because I'm not spending the next 30 years fixing things. I don't like the word project. I hate having projects and chores. I've deliberately taken paths and choices so that I can relax as much as possible. I feel like some people look down on me for it, but F them. Being the supportive friend or significant other who'll never say no, even if it's a really bad idea. "Kindly let me help you, or you'll drown," said the monkey, safely putting the fish up in a tree. Alan Watts. People who record themselves doing something nice for someone in need. I'm all for helping people, but the minute you bring your own camera crew, it loses all meaning. Yeah, I know someone like this. She's kind of a guru of kindness in some circles, but it's fake. One particularly troubling example was something she wrote about how she was so there for a dying friend. She included many photos of herself by this guy's bedside while he was in a coma, despite her totally ignoring him while he was sick and not in a coma, and wrote so much about how painful but conducive to growth this whole experience was. In reality, she's a selfish, awful person who wouldn't bend down to save a puppy drowning in a puddle without a camera around. I once saw her yell at someone for being helpful to a stranger without any fanfare. "You have a Jesus complex. You're acting like being kind is nothing, like it's not a sacrifice." Probably because it tees her off every time someone is actually the way she pretends to be. Being offended on behalf of another person without knowing or wanting to know their opinion. People that say they're always 100% honest and aren't afraid to speak their mind. It's definitely useful when needed, but normally just makes a person seem insufferable and rude. Brutally honest people care more about the brutal than the honesty. Absolutely, if you're going to be honest, at least have some tact. The attitude of the person saying honest stuff can go an awfully long way depending on whether they're just being rude or they're also offering solutions too with their honest advice. Unwavering loyalty. No, sometimes people don't deserve it and you shouldn't be ashamed to let them go. Constantly being so quick to call people toxic just because you had a fight or disagreement and you don't like it. Obviously, if someone is a mental or physical bully, then sure, I've got a few people out of my life too. But the culture we've created has people cutting each other off over everything. No one learns loyalty, conflict resolution, and no one is allowed to grow. Also, too many people have become too proud to acknowledge their wrongs and say sorry when they need to. Everyone needs to relearn how to 1. Resolve conflict in a mature and rational way, and 2. Forgive each other, and 3. Apologize for your own actions. People that are always worried for you, but they are just expecting the moment you make a mistake or be under a bad situation so they can feel relieved their lives are a little better than yours. Like most things in life, an Oscar Wilde quote is relevant. Children begin by loving their parents. As they grow older, they judge them. Sometimes they forgive them. Helicopter parenting. That crap scars you, makes you unable to function like a normal adult, and struggle to make your own decisions when it comes to responsibility. Funny you should mention that. I believe we've had at least 2 videos specifically on helicopter parenting on the channel. Self-promotion aside, it sounds more horribly traumatic than the comical metaphor name would suggest. Sweeping issues under the rug for the sake of peace. In other words, being the bigger person. Over-the-top kindness often masks agenda. Charisma goes a long way toward hiding something darker. Constant self-diminishing and downplaying your abilities as humility. Just accept and recognize that you're pretty skilled and have a lot of experience in something, instead of saying that it's easy, that anyone could do the same, and the list goes on. My stepmom was a doctor, and one thing she told me that they drill into you in medical school is how to take a compliment. Because if a family thanks you for saving a loved one's life and you respond with, "Oh shucks, 'tweren't nothing," that's actually an incredibly insulting thing to say to them. The polite thing to do is graciously accept the compliment. Aggressive self-care. Sometimes people use this as a hard stop to get out of things that they don't want to do, because you can't argue with someone saying they need self-care. But there's a line between doing what you need to do in order to bolster emotional and mental health, and being lazy or taking advantage of people who want to support self-care more. Overprotectiveness. Not the general caring and protecting of someone, but a lot of people seem to think it's so adorable when someone is super overprotective over someone else. I'm not weak. I can do things by myself just fine, thanks. Ensuring success. Don't tell your kids that they'll do great things. Don't say that you'll kill it. Give people reasonable expectations and realize that they're normal. Giving and being selfless can sometimes extend to being a doormat. Some people specifically put themselves in positions to be used in order to guilt or manipulate or feel worthy and needed. Always saying what's on your mind, people who claim to have no filter are generally just rude. It's much more commendable to know when to shut the frick up. The super ultra laid back mentality. Not everything is okay, not everything is a joke or is cool. It's good to have boundaries and to take things seriously. When I'm around groups of people that are overtly positive, like a workout group or something, I get crazy annoyed. Not that I'm a proponent of negativity, but I am a proponent of moderation and balance. Without negativity in a strictly positive situation, there's no balance or check. And when it's amplified by a large group of people, it quickly becomes loud and obnoxious to me. It'd be the same case if you were around a group of people that were overtly negative. The lack of balance makes me so uncomfortable. Being too quick to leap on people for perceived toxicity. One example of this is gossip. People love to say that they hate gossip, but in reality it's part of what makes us human. Gossip that is untruthful is harmful, but the rest isn't that bad. For example, if someone tells you that a person they had to work with was lazy and didn't do their part, they're venting, and it saves you from having to go through it yourself. Not being honest with people solely to make them feel good. It's kinda like 50-50 with this one. If they need the boost, then maybe, but overall it's generally a bad move. Putting people in their place. I've only ever seen insufferable drama queens and bullies use this term when referring to themselves. Respecting your elders. Respect is earned, not given. This doesn't mean that you can't show basic human decency, of course. However, I will not respect someone just because they're older than me, no matter what kind of person they are or how they treat me or make me feel. Sorry, not sorry. I don't really know how to say this eloquently. I think there's this pervasive belief in American society that speaking up when you don't like something or causing conflict is always bad or not cool. Confrontation is uncomfortable for everyone involved, but often is extremely necessary for us or society to change for the better. It seems like we always try to appease the situation we're in, and often it causes undue suffering. What's a sign that things are about to get real bad real quick? When someone who's been doing the job a whole hell of a lot longer than you have looks frustrated or nervous. My dad used to work for a pharmaceutical plant. It was dangerous work, but their foreman was always calm and had never been known to make drama out of anything, even chemical spills. One day, the foreman got a call from his wife. Their newborn daughter was in the ER, suspected meningitis, didn't look like she'd make it. He dropped the phone, said nothing, and literally ran the half-mile across the plant out to the car park to get to the hospital. When he stopped and pulled out his keys, he looked back and saw a dozen or so others running towards their own cars, including my dad. They thought that the only thing that would make that man that nervous was a full-on meltdown, so they weren't sticking around either. His daughter lived and is now a successful engineer, so they still find the story funny. To answer all the questions I'm getting in one go, she did have meningitis and was extremely ill, but pulled through completely unexpectedly. This was Ireland, early 90s, so there was no real protocol or experience for meltdown or severe chemical spills. They obviously had extensive training, but no one genuinely expected it. Bonus fun facts about the story: the guy's nickname before all this was Turbo. This was a joke because this guy only stood up for lunch. These were not fit young, college-aged men. They were all in their 30s or 40s, used to sitting down and doing very little hands-on work with the substances. Think a dozen or so Homer Simpsons sprinting to their cars. Homer being my dad's hard-earned nickname. A few of them did drive him to the hospital so that he didn't have to worry about parking. They also brought the girl, her sister, and her family teddy bears and basic necessities while they were staying in hospital so that they were comfortable. They named a new protocol after her. It deals with emergency evacuation procedures. It's a serious procedure, but the naming was a deliberate joke by upper management. They even brought her in when she was about 2 to do an honorary ribbon-cutting type thing. When someone asks to speak with you somewhere else rather than just to tell you immediately. My former boss always did this, like, "Ted, we need to talk. Can you come to my conference room, pal?" I'd anxiously go in there. "Ted, you still have vacation days left from last year. Please find 3 days to take them in the next 3 months or they expire." That went in a very different direction than most interactions where the boss asks to speak to you discreetly. Happy for you, the rest of us should maintain vigilance when those fateful words are uttered. A work-based warning sign? Once they stop doing the fringe benefits. The biggest warnings is usually the free coffee. Once that goes away, it's done. The free coffee never went away, however, everyone in middle management, the holiday party, quarterly dividends, retirement 401k match, overtime, Hourly production bonuses, raises, morale, leisure environment, vice presidents, half-hour department, overtime pay after 5 hours for drivers and messengers, promotions, breaks, branch meetings, and monthly practice ammo. I'm sure I've left some things out. Overall, it was an interesting ride. Gotta love giving back to their shareholders. If you are having an argument on the street and the guy's friends slowly work their way behind you, that's a bad sign. It's about to go south. When the ones in senior management with a conscience start saying things like, "It's always a good habit to keep your resume current," or "I hear the job market is really strong right now." I had a buddy printing off his letter of resignation at work. His immediate manager walked into the room and caught a glimpse of what it was. He told him that he should probably just hang on to that and give it to him at the end of the day. Really emphasized end of day. HR called him a couple of hours later and laid him off with a year's pay. You get that strange watery feeling in the back of your throat, the universal "I'm about to hurl" feeling. That's your saliva production increasing to protect the lining of your esophagus from the acids in your stomach. It's an automatic reaction that's a prelude to vomiting. It's a pretty bad sign when the locals all clear out. When the drunk bloke you're having an argument with takes a good long look at your shoes, I can guarantee you he's gonna sucker punch you. Bonus points if you suddenly get a tingly feeling in your stomach. When you're doing the deed and someone says, "Uh-oh," probably not what you meant, but I can confirm. With 2 young kids, hearing "uh-oh" from the other room when my wife and I are doing it is the biggest mood killer and panic inducer there is. When they want the money before the substances, you're screwed. It's Monday, and as you enter work, there are several security guards stationed in the hallway from a company you don't recognize. Your boss tells you to stay in your cubicle until instructed to show up to the conference room, sorted by alphabet. Not everybody is called. Bonus, when you get to the conference room, you have to turn in your work badge to an armed guard to gain access. People wanted closure. Well, this was a layoff that happened at IBM in 1992 to a friend of mine. They laid off about 90% of the office. Those left were relocated to other campuses. 1. You were called into the conference room. You surrendered your badge, got alerted with a bunch of people you were to be let go. 2. Got a severance package. You signed forms, don't talk to coworkers, the press, among others, and you got 1 copier box. 3. You had 15 minutes to fill said copier box with all your personal belongings. And 4. At 15:01, ready or not, the guard grabbed you and escorted you to your car. You had to leave immediately. Some guards actually physically dragged some people out like bouncers. Like old women and everything. One guy worked with the IBM and NASA moon landing team, been with Big Blue for 30 to 35 years. He couldn't fill all his pictures, awards, and all his stuff in 15 minutes, and certainly not in a copier box. He was escorted out. His stuff, like signed prints from astronauts, models of the LEM, were thrown in the dumpster, but some fellow co-workers saved most of it and gave it back to him. It was seriously an absolute cluster frick. My friend in her 50s was sobbing and shaking from the experience. If you see someone showing signs of the FAST, F. Facial drooping, A. Arm weakness, S. Slurred speech, and T. Time, pretty much means the person is having a stroke. You should call 911 because there is a 3 to 4.5 hour window that a stroke person can have a clot buster alteplase, which could end up giving patients most of their normal functions. When someone goes inside their house to get something in the middle of an argument. Alternatively, when someone goes outside to get something from their car in the middle of an argument. The sky turns green. The 3 times I've been in the area where the sky has turned really green, things have not gone well at all. Been through 2 sets of 1.5-inch hail, rain so hard you couldn't see past the windshield, and a wind that would have knocked a tornado over. I'll sit and watch thunderstorms roll in with lightning and thunder, but when things go green, I retreat. In England, someone saying, "Right," especially if it's said as they're getting out of their seat. When you put oxygen on someone and it doesn't change their blood oxygen level. Also, when a previously alert and oriented person suddenly gets confused and or belligerent, things are about to go south fast. We need to talk. Whenever I hear this, I immediately think, oh crap. Every time I've had a bad conversation with a girl, it's always started with those very words. When you hear those words, things aren't about to go south, it's far too late and you're already doomed. Those 4 words in that order are orders of magnitude scarier than any other way of putting it. Can I have a word? Can I talk to you? And we have something to discuss. are all intimidating, but none of them hold the same level of bowel-watering, ominous threat of emotional destruction as "we need to talk." When you start feeling rumblings in your stomach and no bathroom around. I try to never be too far from a bathroom. When the animals freak the F out. My grandma's dog actually herded me into the basement right before an earthquake hit when I was a kid. Kelsey was a good dog. Basement is maybe a strong word, downstairs of a split level, so the downstairs is partially underground. Downstairs and upstairs have been lauded as more or less a matter of where you are when the earthquake hits, if the house is well made. But getting away from fally stuff and windows is important. So I feel safe knowing that Kelsey pushing me into getting under the pool table downstairs instead of under Grandma's china hutch upstairs was not her secretly trying to murder me. Tripping me on the stairs would have been a better way to go for that, and she was a smart dog. When upper management start leaving the company, and when they hand out last checks and ask you to stick around for the going away party, ditch the party and cash your check immediately. Do not pass go, nothing. They're worried about a run on payroll because they don't have enough for everyone, and they're hoping the party will make you forget that their check will bounce. Experienced it twice in the 2000 and 2001 crash. If you're in a boat on the water and your hair starts to stand up on its own, get to land immediately. You're the highest point on a flat lake, and that is the telltale sign of static charge. Lightning is imminent, and you are the lightning rod. This happened to my family some years ago. We were fishing, it was cloudy, and a storm was an hour or so out, when suddenly all of our hair started to stand up. My dad, mum, and brother all thought it was cool and weird. I was the only one who was concerned, and I didn't know why, and said we should go back to land. They didn't listen, but apparently I put up enough of a fight that we did get off the lake. A few hours later, my parents told my brother's science teacher about that, and his eyes got wide. He said had we not left when we did, we were very likely to have been struck. When the shoreline retreats back a mile into the sea. Where I live, that's how far it goes when the tide goes out. However, as a geologist, I think it's my duty to say that not all tsunamis do this, and most tsunamis have several waves, often with the third or fourth waves being the strongest. If you live in an earthquake-prone area with a tsunami risk, don't simply rely on this or animals. Pay attention to local and international tsunami warnings. A 2-foot tsunami in Hawaii lifted a train and carried it 100 meters. Don't mess around with these things. When those little oxygen masks drop out of the ceiling. Yeah, especially if you're not on an airplane. When your captain is wearing a life jacket. When the DM says, roll initiative, but no one's around except you guys. Whenever you fail a roll that the DM asks for out of the blue, stuff's going to go very badly. Go ahead and roll perception. Oh, alright, 4. Alright, so there's nothing out of the ordinary, so you guys set up camp like normal. 3 minutes later, all of my friends are dead and half my butt is inside a dragon. You're pulled over. You hand the officer your license and registration. He goes back to the car. 2 more cop cars pull over next to you and 1 is a K9 unit. When it's 3 a.m. at IHOP and a drunk dude walks in and starts yelling at a woman who is eating pancakes with another man. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. When the redneck says, F that, I'm getting out of here. Like rats on a sinking ship, follow the redneck. If he ain't having it, there's no way you can handle it. When you're in a relationship and someone starts their sentence with, you always, in the middle of an argument. You aren't necessarily beyond the point of no return, but you are treading deadly water. 3 things. 1. No animals or insects in sight. 2. No wind whatsoever. Everything is still. 3. The night is quieter than the dead. It's like time froze. A huge hurricane is coming your way. Get in your car and scram. Ah yeah, in case you missed the week-long announcements about the storm that's been moving through the Caribbean Isles, people sandbagging their doorways, no bottled water being available, or cans of food on the shelves, your friends talking about the storm, or boards being put up on every shop window, that's when you look for animals and insects being gone, so that you know a Category 4 or 5 hurricane is barreling down on your butt. When you're just trying to buy a gosh darn kebab after a night on the town and some bro takes his shirt off for no apparent reason right there in that fine establishment because he thinks someone bumped into him on purpose, and according to the bro code, he now has to fight someone to the death because of reasons. And even with the audible sigh from literally everyone in the surrounding, tired and hungry crowd, he simply does not take the gosh darn hint that everyone is giving him to just chill already. The pilot tells the flight attendants to sit down, or when the flight attendants look worried. They know the difference between regular turbulence and holy crap turbulence, or an actual problem that you should be scared of. Yep, I love those flights where things begin to get a little bit bumpy and you see the flight attendants walk briskly down the aisle staring straight ahead with looks of utter seriousness on their faces. Nothing like it for stirring the panic. When the weather gets really beautiful, you've got a good chunk of money in the bank and your car has zero problems. He turns his hat back in the midst of battle. When they close the doors and start to play The Rains of Castamere. Minnesotan here, when you hear a train when there's no train around, chances are you're going to start seeing trees flying within minutes. Here's a few of mine. An angry person starts saying, "If you don't," or "I swear I'm about to," they're warning you to back off, they're about to lose their temper. When you have 15 missed calls from a parent. When you hear voices getting louder and louder and louder. Alternatively, when a previously loud person suddenly goes silent or doesn't laugh at your joke. I think it was Dimitri Martin that said something like, "Adults aren't allowed to climb trees. If you see some kids in a tree, you don't think twice. But if you see adults in a tree, you think, I don't know what's going on here, but I need to get in a fricking tree now." When your highest-ranking general crosses the Rubicon with a large army. I have a run of good luck, surefire sign things are about to go bad. That just happened to me. Finally took a nice vacation after years, came back feeling great, and a week later, I was fired. They cancel more plans than usual with differing excuses, and they start to ignore you without warning. If there are two Jan Michael Vincents in one quadrant. Tornado sirens at night usually mean it's going to be a long evening. When your teacher has a smug look on their face and says, "Put away your notes, class," you can look around the room and see the fear in our eyes because nobody has studied for a pop quiz. Or if you hear a loud, obnoxious voice behind you saying, "Oh my God, is that you, blank? It's been such a long time." When the angry guy who got kicked out of the party goes out to his car and then walks back in all calm. Get the F out of there because he's about to start shooting. You're in a canoe down the river and banjo music starts playing. Jim Cantor of the Weather Channel shows up. When she puts her hair back with a hair tie. Wait, I might be thinking about something else. 3 things. When a folding chair is thrown into a crowd. When shots are fired, or when she says, "We need to talk." 1. Angry crowds. In Afghanistan, we were clearing out IEDs and I was in a vantage point to cover my bomb squad and the rest of our unit. I turned around to grab something from my bag and this large crowd was out of my hearing range, but I could see the swarm going down the streets, gathering more people as it progressed. I signaled my guys to pack it up. We got out just in time. Our APC was Molotoved as it was leaving. All that because of an earlier event where an IED went off and hurt some people. It wasn't even our team or even our country, but it didn't matter. And 2, maybe it's a trick of the mind, but stuff tends to slow right the frick down and a weird silence drops. That feeling is fricking terrifying. Faster flowing water. Conspicuous overconsumption. The housing bubble was the most recent example of this. People getting into mortgages and houses they couldn't afford. The dot-com bust before that was rife with startups that slung money like Elvis slung pink convertibles. When the patient says they're gonna die, a sense of impending doom is a bad sign. Stuff is about to go down south. Not today is what I usually say, and sometimes I'm right. I once heard a story from a doctor quite similar to that. He said that patients screaming and saying that they're going to die usually don't. He said one patient he had suddenly went quiet, leaned back into his seat and glassed over. The doctor said that's when you get that sense of impending doom that just makes you go cold. All the staff in the room went from, "Okay, let's get this guy patched up," to, "Oh, frick." You're the manager of a store. You open at 10 a.m. As you open your gates at 10 a.m., the phone rings at 10:01 a.m. You pick up the phone and before you begin your usual spiel, "Thank you for calling Superstore the caller starts with the word, "Look." When the calmest, most reasonable dude who is never worried gets worried. Yep, as a somewhat anxious human being, this is very true. The rest of us look to the chill guys and gals in our lives as a barometer for how screwed we're about to be. I just think it's funny how it's never funny. When your Reinhard swaps to a Hanzo. When a herd of animals are headed towards higher ground, it's probably a good idea to follow them. When your grandmother, who's been living with stage 4 cancer for the past 2 months, says she realizes the pain will be ending soon because her oncologist at this point isn't sugarcoating how long she has anymore. The fact she also says she's tired of hurting and ready for the hurting to stop cements the reality of the fragility of life and how important simply treasuring other people is. Love as much and as hard as you can. Sincerely, a sad grandson. When one of my idiot friends says, "Hold my beer." When Coca-Cola pulls distribution of its product in an area. When mid-level management is bailing en masse. When you're out drinking with your buddies and you run into a girl that had history with 2 of the guys. Saturday night for us reached south in record time. Don't forget to scrub your accounts, kiddos. Wouldn't want anything of value falling into the hands of the shareholders. When your coworker starts getting the attitude of, "I do everything around here." They get the martyr complex going. "I'm the only person who can do that. You guys would be lost without me." This person is making it known that their morale at work is bad, and bad morale is contagious. I was that guy. I got fired. Best lesson I ever learned. No one is irreplaceable. Went on to management. Shared that story a few times instead of firing employees that may have deserved it. It also gave me the confidence to fire top performers that deserve to be fired. No one is irreplaceable. When your floor manager clocks in and every day says, "Is it 5:30 yet?" No, dude, it's not. You get paid twice as much as I do and you're literally destroying the morale of everyone on the floor under you. When a Marine says, "That is stupid and I want no part of it," and leaves. When every dog in the neighborhood starts barking like crazy. My sign that things are about to go south? 1. Go to the North Pole. 2. Take a step in any direction. When you've been drinking a lot and you have to keep spitting, you're about to hurl up. The character who always has his eyes closed opens his eyes. I'd like you to meet Sanjay. He's visiting from our facility in India, and I'd like you to show him how to do your job. As a nurse and healthcare professional, when your patient tells you that something just feels wrong, or they feel like they're going to die, stuff's about to go south real fast. Case in point, my little old lady patient called me into her room the other night and said that she was nervous and needed to pray, then proceeded to do the sign of the cross. I noped out of there so fast and called her doctor to tell her they needed to see her now. Sure enough, she coded about 15 minutes later. When Dad is going to get ice cream and nothing else. That's always bad news. Your mom and I are getting a divorce. Sparky got out somehow, and we won't be going to see your grandma anymore. When the music changes. You're in a bar, and some guy looking crazy comes in the door. He looks around and locks his eye on a couple and yells, "What the frick are you doing with my wife?" When the weather starts getting colder and you look up into the sky only to see a large flock of birds that happen to be traveling in one specific direction. When you turn up to a job interview and the interviewer is holding a video camera and you're asked to sit on a black leather couch. Well, for my coworkers, it's usually me saying, "We need to leave now." Anytime I've left, there was something that happened, such as a cleaning detail, higher-ranking people coming into our shop and getting angry for no reason, uniform inspections, or any number of stupid military stuff. What nasty side effects did you experience in clinical trials? Phase 1 clinical trial for skin cream designed for emergency burn care. Half the participants, myself not included, started sloughing off sheets of skin like lepers. For the ones affected, their bed sheets or pajamas would pull away the top layer of their arm or leg. We only had one limb treated per dosage. It was pretty gruesome and the trial was cancelled after just a week. I spent a while worrying about it happening, then I assumed I was in the control group. Turns out, I wasn't in the control group, but what the cream was doing was making the skin ultra-sensitive to sunlight. Since I worked indoors and had just discovered Team Fortress 2, I didn't get enough sunlight to trigger the side effect. Gaming saves lives, people. Cal GB 10801. Did a number on my liver, but I don't have leukemia now, so I'll take it. I didn't get paid, but I got to live through for what many is a terminal diagnosis, so I figured that was payment enough. I took part in a trial of a malaria vaccine. The vaccine didn't have any side effects, but I did have to sit with a cup of mosquitoes on my arm biting me. Also, I got malaria. I got paid £2,500, and I was well aware of the risks going in and not only motivated by money. Malaria is a huge deal globally, and I wanted to help fight towards its eradication. I'm not a good enough person to say I'd have done it for free, but I also wouldn't have done it if the money was the only reward. The money and the global need added up, if that makes sense, and it was a really interesting process to be a part of. As a scientist in a field pretty far removed from medicine, physics by the way, malaria is still a huge killer, but there's a much better way to help with the issue than the one I went for while at university: give to an effective charity. In fact, in terms of lives saved per dollar donated, giving to the AMF is about the best thing you can possibly do with your money. I've done far more good in the last few years by donating to them than I did by taking part in the trial. It's less interesting and far less cool, but it doesn't come with malaria. Malaria freaking sucks, but it's completely curable. I was blood tested every day after exposure, and as soon as they found signs of the parasite in my blood, they pumped me full of treatment, some synthetic quinine or something similar, according to the docs. The malaria I got was a lab strain with no resistance to the treatment, and it took about 5 days for me to feel better. Those 5 days were absolutely awful. I'm guessing that a lot of you believe that malaria stays with you for life, and there's some truth to that. Some types of malaria, the less deadly kinds as it happens, can appear to be treated. The person gets better, no parasites in the blood, but then they return much later. I got a type where this doesn't happen, but does tend to kill people with no resistance: Plasmodium falciparum. I would probably get malaria for 5 days for £2,500 to be honest. Plus, that's the ultimate sick day excuse. Just leave out the part where you got voluntarily injected. When I was in grad school, I volunteered to be in an experiment in the dental school. I needed to get a wisdom tooth out, and the deal was that they would test out a new filling material, and at the end, they got to keep the tooth and I would get $300 and free dental work. After the first week, it started to hurt. After the second week, the dentists were saying to take more than a double dose of ibuprofen, and keep taking more unless my ears started ringing. By the time 3 weeks were up, there were moments where I had to sit down from the pain. 6 months after they removed the tooth, I was back in for a checkup. I asked the dentist if the experiment was a failure, and she sort of smiled and said that it was going into wider clinical trials. That's when I realized that I had been a part of the control group, valiantly proving that cavities hurt. To be fair to the researchers, they can't tell you that you're in the placebo group because your perception of pain knowing that you had a placebo would skew their data. To be fair to you, I certainly hope that they outlined the risks and procedures in the informed consent, because otherwise not informing you that there may be pain involved is a serious breach of research ethics, and is a valid complaint to the IRB. Oh, don't worry, it was all done correctly, I was informed. I, like most test subjects, imagined that I got the experimental treatment and worried about the side effects, when the opposite was in fact true in this case. One of my friends went in for a research study. He got paid $4,500 to try out a new med for an issue he was having. I think it was an insomnia treatment, I'll have to ask him. Anyways, now he sweats 100% of the time and has to drink over a gallon of water a day to remain reasonably hydrated. Not worth it in my opinion. Hyperhidrosis, poor guy. Not quite a clinical trial, but in the mid-80s my father was one of the first people to accept a new hay fever vaccine. He had suffered badly year on year. A few weeks later he started losing weight, feeling fatigued, and just generally being ill. He was admitted to hospital and after what he describes as hundreds of medical tests, failed to find any reason for why he was ill. The best they could come up with is that somehow a heterosexual man who had never used substances or had a blood transfusion had somehow developed the big transmissible disease of the 90s. Remember, this is back when it was still being called GRID. It was just assumed he'd get sicker and sicker until he passed away. But one day, he started to get better, which also stumped people researching that disease, because that hadn't happened to anyone else. The eventual conclusion being that they didn't know what it was, but it can't have been that. Doctors basically told him he seemed fine now and just to get on with his life. He went back to get the vaccine again the next year, but was told that it had been withdrawn after loads of people died after having it. Turns out it was just a massive dose of roids. It trashed the immune system and people couldn't fight off common illnesses. Hard to prove in retrospect, but it's assumed he came close to joining the deceased. I was in a trial for a treatment for IBD, Crohn's disease. The drug was modulating interleukin-11, basically trying to calm down your immune system so that it quits attacking your gut. It worked really well. I was in remission and I felt fantastic. Then I had my routine blood work done. You know that step where the tube is full of blood and the nurse shakes it back and forth a bit? When the nurse did that with mine, all the color drained from her face. She told me to stay where I was and sit very still, please. And she took off. Turns out that interleukin-11 is really good at making blood clot. When the nurse shook the tube of blood, it started clotting. That's not supposed to happen. Turns out my fibrinogen was so high that if I'd bumped my arm against the doorframe on my way out, I would have thrown a clot that would have killed me. A few doses of blood thinner later and I was good as new. The trial was stopped, I wasn't the only one who clotted up, and the research was shelved. I've never found a medication that was as effective for treating my Crohn's, though. This one scares me the most. It scares me more than the ones where people have died, because you could have been killed at any point and just not known how it happened. Not a failed trial necessarily, since all the data was important, but my father-in-law was a conscientious objector for religious reasons during Vietnam. The army assigned him to be an insect repellent tester. He'd spend his days in an enclosed room covered by different compounds to see how his mosquito companions would react. Some compounds worked better than others. I got a bit of a headache in my trial. They cancelled 2/3 of the study because some liver values were higher than they should have been. I still got paid out in full, living on the edge. I tested a bladder control med that worked pretty well but caused irregular heartbeats. It was nice to not have to run to the bathroom 20 times a day, but I do need my heart to work properly. Having your heart work properly is ideal for day-to-day life, it must be said. Not sure if any of our IBS sufferers would decide it was worth it in the end, but who knows? I was in a study that was testing how people infected with a certain immunodeficiency disease reacted to bedbug bites. I can't remember which disease. It wasn't either of the two big ones, though. I was a part of the healthy control group. I went into a sterile lab, got nibbled on safely by bedbugs. They put a screen between my arm and the bugs so they wouldn't end up on me, and then recorded my skin's reactions for a week. Did this 4 times, I think. I was informed they didn't find anything significant after the study concluded. Must have been a tough paper to submit to journals. My chest swelled up until it looked like I'd bolted basketballs onto my ribcage. Then I started lactating. Like, a lot. Like, can't leave the house because my fun bags are geysers, constantly shooting out some mystery fluid and occasionally blood. Then came the vertigo and the constant tinnitus. After a few days of this, I advised the doctor the final side effect was going to be self-deletion if we didn't start weaning me off this crap. The intended use was to treat bipolar disorder. Obviously, my reaction to it was extreme. My parents own a research center. We've had a patient die before. The medication was in phase 3. Phase 1 being the most dangerous, and patients stay at the research center, all the way to phase 4, which is supposed to be the most safe. Every time a patient dies while they're in the research study, the pharmaceutical company must send out a safety letter, which is kept on site with all the names of patients who died and their believed cause of death. We don't know the exact cause of death since we're not able to obtain any information after, but it's safe to assume that it was the medication, as it had 4 patients total die. Not in our site, but around the world 4 total. Unfortunately, some patients don't even care what the side effects are and just care about the money they get paid. Some of those deaths may be because of misuse of the medication, but there's really no way to know if the patient took the medication in studies where the patient gets to take the medication home. Very new medication goes through phase 1 research after they're tested on animals, where even the diet is controlled and extremely strict. I work in clinical trials. Most of our volunteers are students. Even though there's a fairly lengthy consent process, you can tell most of the volunteers have paid no attention at all, except for the part about how much they get paid. Some of them couldn't even tell you what substance they're taking and tell me that they think they've had the placebo. There are no placebos in my studies. Chest cancer treatment. I've had 4 rounds of the typical hair falls out, makes you puke stage 4 chemo, then 4 rounds of Taxotere, a somewhat less debilitating chemo, plus the clinical trial substance Xeloda. The trial was approved for metastatic disease, which I didn't have. The Taxotere makes everything taste like soap. I couldn't stand to be in the same room with food. The Xeloda gives you killer diarrhea. I spent 12 weeks basically eating nothing. I called it the Procter & Gamble diet. I managed to choke down a chocolate milkshake once a day and had explosive diarrhea for hours after. I lost 50 pounds. Turns out the Xeloda had no effect on the cancer, but the Taxotere, the soapy one, worked fine. I'm 12 years out of treatment. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. This is my line of work, clinical trial data, and one thing to keep in mind is that an adverse event is anything that happens during the trial, whether it's related or not. A guy gets headaches sometimes? Great! Every headache during his time in the trial is recorded as an AE and evaluated. And you might think, hey, I don't usually have heartburn or whatever, but I did just now and it's probably the medication. But the doctor decides that, and if there's any question, there are other docs and a safety panel who'll review it. I was on male hormonal birth control for years through clinicaltrials.gov. It was a huge success with minimal side effects, and I wish I could get back on it. The medication worked and was safe, but ultimately it hasn't been brought to the market because most men can't stand to inject themselves with an inch-long needle every week. Side effects were increased energy, fat loss, and an increased libido. Not a failed trial, but I signed up for a medical study where they had to remove a lymph node from my body. They were paying $300, so I figured what's the worst that could happen, right? Well, they didn't tell me that the lymph node was going to be taken from my bikini line by a 50-year-old surgeon who had to rub iodine all over my hoo-ha. He sewed it up a little bit funny, so I still have a huge scar and the wound was right where my leg bends, so I walked funny for like 3 weeks. If anyone asked why I was limping, I had to tell them about my poor, disfigured vajayjay, and it was terrible. 3 out of 10, still got $300. I took part in a clinical trial for NASA where they paid me to essentially sleep for a month in one room. I couldn't go outside, couldn't leave the room, could play on my phone and go on the computer, but that was about it. I ended up sleeping probably 16 to 18 hours a day out of boredom. The trial wasn't technically a failure, but afterwards I had trouble sleeping usual amounts of the time, as well as doing day-to-day tasks. I was paid $5,000 for the month. I'd say it was worth it. Is it weird that the narrator would do the one where he would get malaria, but not being locked alone in a room for a month? Maybe if I could edit videos and just get paid gangbusters from both income sources, but I'm still not sure it seems worth it. My mother-in-law participated in a large-scale trial of aspirin being tested as a cure-all for the elderly. The pharmaceutical company was trying to prove that everyone should take aspirin daily beyond a certain age to reduce blood clotting. Coincidentally, it's also a great way to sell a lot of aspirin. My parents-in-law were both part of the trial, and my mother-in-law had some medical issues that ended up involving internal bleeding. If she hadn't been on aspirin, she would have been okay. But due to the blood-thinning aspect of the aspirin, the problem escalated badly and she ended up vomiting blood all over her hospital room and nearly died. It's hard to describe the feelings of horror and helplessness watching her vomiting blood on the floor while nurses rush into the room from everywhere, telling you to stand back and take emergency action to try to stop her from dying. One of the nurses later told us that we were extremely lucky that she lived. A few weeks after her near-death experience, a group of people from the pharmaceutical company showed up unannounced at their house and ever so gently pressured them into signing a waiver, withdrawing from the trial and saying they wouldn't sue. Being nice, trusting elderly people, they signed it. We later found out that the whole large-scale trial had been canned that same day. Since they got her agreement to withdraw, it won't be recorded in any official report that the trial nearly killed her, just that she withdrew from it. The whole thing really stank in my opinion. I imagine that they wanted to keep their options open to run more trials in the future, so they didn't want her negative results hanging over them. I was in a clinical trial for an allergy medication. My allergies were terrible throughout the trial, so either I was in the control group or the medication was a failure. The worst part was that my allergies were awful. I couldn't take any other allergy medication and it was just not fun. I don't think I'd do it for a condition that I needed to be treated for because being in the control group means that you suffer. I did a clinical trial attempting to treat Crohn's with an antibiotic. It turned my number 2s, number 1s, and even my splooge bright yellow. I came to find out it was a dye they used in the placebo to make it match the real deal. I got Preganinant, a trial for a non-hormonal birth control gel. First month, used it probably 3 or 4 times. Long-distance boyfriend, we only see each other on weekends, if that. Bam, I'm 11 weeks in. It's okay, it's unplanned. I thought about terminating, but we both wanted kids and we wanted to be together, so we decided to figure it out. We were both in graduate school, both graduating before the due date, so hopefully we'll be more financially secure when it gets here. The worst part was probably having to explain. I usually just say it was unplanned and people don't ask, but with my parents and close friends, I had to explain. I ended up just saying we were switching methods and things got messed up, which is the truth. I once attended a trial for some kind of antidepressant or anxiolytic. First they injected me with cholecystokinin to cause an anxiety attack, and I had to evaluate the severity. It was supposed to be maximum, 10 out of 10, but it wasn't for me, 6 out of 10. It made me realize that I'd had anxiety attacks before. I was evaluated as a healthy person, but it turned out I wasn't and in denial about my mental health. I didn't get taken to the next stage of the trial. Did a study for something that was supposed to be comparable to a Nuva ring. I was told that they had no real reason to think it wouldn't prevent pregnancy. It was more of a study to see how it eased period symptoms. They did suggest that I continue to use regular protection just in case. I wasn't worried about it, I'm not very fertile anyway, and getting paid to use free birth control sounded cool. I had the worst, heaviest, painful periods I've seen since before I started taking other birth control. But it was really only bad for 2 days a month, so I could live with it. It was supposed to be a 12-month study, but they cancelled it after about 7 months. 5 girls out of maybe 50 or so had gotten pregnant. The lady at the center said they'd all been very obese, and they figured that had something to do with why it was ineffective, and that I, a thin person, shouldn't be worried. I didn't get pregnant, but the fact that my period symptoms were so awful makes me think it probably wasn't working for me, and the fact that I didn't get pegante was just random. Honestly though, I'd do it all over again if I had the chance and just use rubber protection like normal. I got 2 free pap smears and a total of about $400. After doing a Google search and finding out what a Nuva ring is, how to insert said ring, and many graphic and comprehensive pictures of both the installation of said protection and how it works, we'll call today's video an educational experience for the narrator. See, I'd consider it a fail. However, the medicine they used has gone on to the next phase in being approved by the FDA. I was part of a trial where they were testing an extended pain relief injection, a mixture of Marcaine and bupivacaine, for a recovery after surgery to try and limit the amount of narcotics needed for pain relief. I received a bunionectomy and stayed with the clinic for 3 days while they monitored me by taking blood at regular intervals as well as vitals. I had the option for rescue meds if I needed them. The nurses in the clinic destroyed my hands and arms from not being able to properly withdraw blood, and they weren't the nicest people. After being discharged, I developed a very large blister on the top of my foot that was operated on, and I rapidly declined from there. I ended up having a hole on the top of my foot the size of a $50, which exposed the metatarsal and a joint on my big toe, which in turn exposed me to a host of different types of infection. I lost my job because of being extremely sick and had to have over 8 surgeries, 3 of which I woke up during. I had a wound vacuum for around 8 months and had to be in a hyperbaric chamber, 3 to 4 times a week. I had antibiotic-resistant infections, including a chronic bone infection, and also became dependent on painkillers. I couldn't walk for over a year and was almost hospitalized a few times. At one point, we were discussing possible amputation. I was severely depressed. I was one of 3 people who had this happen to them. I have permanent scars and deformations from what I went through. I'll never be the same again because of this, and none of what I experienced was listed in the informed consent that I signed. Was given Roaccutane back in the 90s when it was still being tried. Now they know that 2 out of every 100 teenagers successfully commits self-deletion, and I know why I've been living with a voice inside my head telling me to unalive myself ever since. I was in a trial where they were testing a new instrument to intubate people with. Somehow it got stuck in my throat and I was choking bad as the anesthesia kicked in and I lost consciousness. It's a very strange feeling to be choking as you lose consciousness into the darkness. I thought maybe I was dying. It was traumatic and my throat was very sore for a week after that. I know it was a trial and I signed up for it, but the whole thing left a bad taste in my mouth. Seemed like amateur hour. Not as severe as the other people here, but I was in a study testing the benefits to asthma sufferers' overall breathing from taking Allegra. It works okay on allergy symptoms, but didn't do squat for my lung capacity or the frequency of my asthma attacks. It was nice not to have the itchy eyes though. Was in adult ADD trial to make Concerta being on adults with ADD. Every week dosage increased. Eventually dose went over 100 milligrams a day. I didn't sleep for what seemed like weeks and lost loads of weight. I really think they wanted to see how high they could take it. After a few weeks of that, I refused to be in the study if they raised it any more. My wife took part in a clinical trial for an HPV vaccine before I'd ever met her. The trial was unsuccessful in that the specific vaccine wasn't approved or successful, but it did provide the people developing the vaccine good data which helped them develop a vaccine, which did work. As far as I know, there was no adverse side effects. I was the reason it failed. It was a very well put together psychology experiment in decision making. It took hours just to be a part of. It was seeing if men or women would be higher risk takers. The people programmed video games, made long questionnaires, put together tons of work. We started as a group of 50 men and women, then split to 25 of each separately. Then 5 groups of 5. About 10 minutes into being in the 25-person group, I asked, "Wait, are we just supposed to avoid risks in this to get the better score?" We had been told it was the decision-making and not the risk-taking. Risk was the variable. When I called it out, we all tailored our choices differently. I was later banned from trials. My professor was kind of annoyed at me for that. What do you swear you saw, but don't have any proof of? When I was 10, we had a 14-year-old German Shepherd who was getting very sick. I was home alone momentarily as my mum went to the neighbors to pick up a book or something. Our German Shepherd came over, convinced me to walk outside with him, and started licking my hands. Looked at me and ran away jumping fences and never came back. He was so loyal and good to this day that no one believes me and thinks he was stolen because he would never leave. I'm almost certain that he did that because he didn't want us to see him die and wanted to go to the massive forest area and do his thing. I miss you, buddy. Those of you wondering why no one believes a kid on something that does happen a lot was that we lived in Iran at the time and the dogs, especially rare purebreds, were usually stolen, so my family thought it was a result of that. I've had glasses since the 3rd grade. I was playing tackle football with friends after school. I wasn't wearing the glasses and tackled one of my friends. Really big collision. And for a second I regained full eyesight. Then I blinked and it was gone again. My sister and I both had this before. It's often unprovoked and a rare occurrence. We just blink and wham, our vision is 20/20 for a second. Then we blink too soon and it's over. I remember grocery shopping with my mother once when I was about 13 and I blinked and suddenly had perfect vision. I saw everything clearly and could read all of the labeled sections in the back. I then blinked again and everything was blurry. I was amazed and also extremely disappointed that it disappeared so quickly. I'd just applied to a job at a gas station on a major interstate route in the US, and I was leaving the lobby of the rest area building. When I pushed the door open and walked out, I saw a seagull take flight from the top of a lamppost on the far side of the parking lot, which was shaped like a rectangle, with the building at one of the skinny ends. The only reason it caught my eye was because the parking lot was empty, save 1 or 2 cars besides mine, and it was like pushing the door open also pushed a button to trigger the bird to take off, and the timing was perfect. So I'm walking down the sidewalk and I'm watching the seagull fly in my general direction following the edge of the lot, when it gets to the corner and turns so it's going to fly directly over me. I think to myself, no way. And sure as crap, I see the seagull drop one in midair just before it gets to me. It's flying a good 20-ish feet in the air, so I simply sidestep and watch as this giant blob of bird crap splats down onto the ground, directly where I was. So the seagull saw me walk out the door and instantly decided it was going to try to crap on me. I mean, I think by the laws of comedy, the interview should have gone really well, and you just had to think to yourself, nothing could crap on this day, as you entered the lot. Although, admittedly, it would have been more fitting if the projectile had actually hit you. Sometime in the early 2000s, my wife and I went to an Eminem concert at the House of Blues on Sunset in LA. Yeah, I know, they're tearing it down, and it sucks. I saw a lot of great shows there, including his Royal Purple badness. Anyway, the entire show, maybe 90 minutes, there was this guy dancing on stage in a full mummy suit, and he was doing really awkward and funny dance moves that you wouldn't expect from a background dancer at a rap concert. But hey, he's in a mummy suit, so whatever. The show ends and Eminem screams into the mic, "Do y'all want to know who the mother-frickin' mummy is?" And the crowd cheers. And he screams, "Dustin mother-frickin' Hoffman." And he pulls a zipper at the back of the costume, and out comes an extremely sweaty, 60-something-year-old Dustin Hoffman, and the crowd goes into a stunned silence for a few seconds and then erupts in cheers. My wife and I just kinda looked at each other in disbelief, and when I tell people that, they always say something like, "Oh, it must have just been someone they found who looked like him." but that guy was Dustin motherfrickin' Hoffman, and no, I have no proof. Not my story, but my brother's. He lost his wallet and was retracing his steps looking for it. A homeless man approached him at a coffee shop and said to him, "Don't worry, it's in the bathroom sink. Your wallet is in your bathroom sink." Later that night, he did indeed find his wallet at home in the bathroom sink. A few days later, he saw the same homeless man and thanked him for his help. The guy became really irritated and told my brother he'd never seen him before. Could have been a lucky guess, but I think magical bum makes for a better story. Went and got the mail from the previous day at like 7 a.m. No one was around, but this massive black dog was walking around my neighbor's Ford Windstar. By massive, I mean this dog's head went to the windows, and when his head was at the back bumper, his hind legs were still at the driver's door. When I was about 10, they started putting missing children on milk cartons. Every morning for a while, I was looking at this boy's face on the side of the milk while I would eat my cereal. Then one day a car went down my street while I was playing outside, and there was a boy in the back seat with his face up close to the window looking out. I'm 99% sure it was the boy from the milk carton. I told my parents, but they didn't believe me. Something similar happened to me. I was 5 to 6 and playing outside with other kids. All of a sudden, these two cars stop by a sidewalk. They grab a girl on a tricycle and speed off. Only her bike was left. We ran to my mom to tell her someone got kidnapped. She was cooking, somewhat listened, nodded her head and smiled. "Oh, really?" And that was that. I think about it often. Never heard anything afterwards. That's why I've been wondering whether this was real or just my imagination. On the other hand, other kids were with me and they all saw it. I was at the Shed Aquarium in Chicago. I walked up to the cuttlefish tank and for some reason all 20 or so of the cuttlefish rushed over to me. It was a big tank, maybe 10 feet long. I walked the length of it and they followed me. I walked back, they followed. A few other people saw and tried it themselves. But alas, the cuttlefish only had eyes for me. My best guess as to the cause was the guy who feeds them is my doppelganger. When I was about 10 years old, I saw my old dog catch a crow out of the air and then just gently release it. Ball lightning. It was right after a thunderstorm passed by. I could see floating orbs in the sky. There were a couple of cars parked by an open field and people were watching this happen, so I parked and got out to join them. We all sort of just looked on in silence until they winked out one by one. There were at least 10 of them and they seemed to fly together in patterns. Sometimes they were fast, other times they slowed down or reversed directions. They seemed small, but I could tell this wasn't because they were far up in the sky. If I were to guess, they'd be about the size of a basketball, maybe a little larger. The whole ordeal lasted about 30 minutes. We then all got in our cars and left. I tried taking pictures, but it was dark and the lights were too faint to make out. I should have recorded a video instead. I noticed someone was recording them at the scene, so I'd kind of hoped to see it online at some point. But it's been 2 years now, so I guess not. One day I was looking out of the window of my office and 4 semi-trucks drove past, one after the other. They were, in order, Costco, Costco, Cisco, and Cisco with an SY. Half the people I mentioned to don't care, and the other half don't believe me. Those guys definitely collaborated to mess with people, and I'm here for it. Was there maybe a nearby mega mall with all 4 of those department stores in it that the trucks were heading towards? Awesome. A chameleon escaped from my bag when my friend was giving it to me, and it leapt into a big pile of snow. I looked around for it for a while, but I couldn't find it, so I gave up. Several weeks later, the snow all melted and I was out there and found the lizard guy partially frozen to the ground. I peeled him off and put him in one of those little plastic tanks and set it by the radiator in my house. Within an hour or so, the lizard was hopping around the cage like nothing ever happened. It lived for several years after that and was known to my friend and I as Jesus the Resurrection Lizard. I'm sure there's some scientific explanation to this, like the lizard went into suspended animation or something, which is weird because I've heard chameleons are quite sensitive to temperature, but that being said, this is just bonkers. I was snorkeling in Hawaii once, and I swear I saw something that looked like a clear chameleon, but as soon as I got close, it buried itself in the sand. I still vividly remember discovering a new species. Before my sister was born, my parents found a kitten. They decided to keep it because they could find no owner. They named her Princess. Anyway, my sister is 4 years older than I am. We both grew up with this cat. She'd sometimes follow us and watch over us. My parents used to make jokes about how she thought of us as her kittens. Now, my sister wasn't very nice to me. It took a lot of people a lot of time to realize that she wasn't just nasty. It was full-on, emotionally scarring bullying. My sister is a narcissist, but that's not what you need to know. When I was too young to understand what was happening, I used to talk to Princess. She was like my version of a diary. I'd sit with this creature that was older than I was and tell her all of my problems. One day at a store, my mum told us she'd buy us each a lolly. My sister wanted a different one to me and grabbed my arm and clawed her nails down so hard that it drew blood. It hurt a lot and I was really upset. When we got home, I went and cried to Princess about how scared I'd felt. After a while, I calmed down and went and played with my toys. Princess ambled out of the room. A few minutes later, I heard a shriek and she ambled back in. Turns out she had walked up and scratched my sister's hand, then hissed at her before coming back to sit with me and watch over me playing with the toys. My parents assume that my sister provoked her, but I know. She walked out of the room right after I'd been talking to her and walked back in after the shriek. I can't prove it, but I think Princess saw how scared I was and showed me that she'd protect me. I never told anybody about my white and grey guardian apart from my current cat. I haven't thought about Princess in a while. She lived to be between 19 and 21, depending on how old she was when my parents got her. She lived with them for 19 years and was around 2 when they found her. I loved that cat. Funnily enough, my new cat was originally my sister's. She got him, then left him with my parents, and he slowly became mine. He likes to sit with me more than he likes her. When I was around 10 years old, I went down to a lake when I was on holiday. When I got down there, I vividly remember a massive ball of lightning just hovering, and then it struck the middle of the lake. I never ran so fast in my life back to the little house we were staying in. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I was out for a walk late one night. This was in rural Illinois, so there was nobody else out. I noticed from a distance that there were these squirrels just standing in the middle of the road. I thought to myself, that is strange. When I got closer, I noticed that there were 3 squirrels standing around a cat that was lying down. I thought for a minute the cat was dead, but when I got closer and walked past them, the squirrels and the cat followed me with their eyes, none of them moving a muscle. It was like, move along, nothing to see here. Still to this day, I think of just how bizarre that was. As a child, I touched some weird pest plant in our garden. I think it stung me. Then I saw everything in inverted colors for a short time. Then back to normal. I was in such a shock, I couldn't explain it to my mom. I just went to her crying. You probably touched a brugmansia. They're loaded with scopolamine and can cause you to see things that aren't there. Inverse colors are a common hallucination from them. Brugmansia are a very common garden flower, despite their effects, because only small children will be affected by contact alone. Did you have big orange flowers that hang downward in your garden? Brugmansia are terrifying. Not 2 days ago, I read a trip report about some dude who took brugmansia tea he made out of 2 leaves and 2 flowers. 1 leaf per 32 ounces of water is more than enough. And the guy ended up crashing knee first through a plate glass window and then ripped the back door to his house off its hinges with his own 2 hands. That crap is terrifying. The author, Christina Pratt, in an encyclopedia of shamanism, says that brugmansia induces a powerful trance with violent and unpleasant effects, sickening after effects, and at times temporary insanity. These hallucinations are often characterized by complete loss of awareness that one is hallucinating, disconnection from reality, and amnesia of the episode, such as the one example reported in Psychiatry and Clinical Neuroscience of a young man who amputated his own Johnson and tongue after drinking only 1 cup of brugmansia tea. I've never heard of this leaf before, and it is wild that something like this is apparently a common garden flower. I was also about to rave about how we ban green herb and not this, but it sounds like not many people would want to take this. When I was about 6, my entire family was helping to build my grandparents a new house. I was helping my dad move some really long 2x4s from the lumber pile when a mouse ran out from under the board I had moved. Out in the middle of the woods, mice were no big deal to any of us. I did a double take though because the mouse was frickin' blue. I don't mean the sun reflected off its fur and it had a blue sheen to it. I mean a brilliant, royal blue. He was running fast, but I got my dad to notice it too, and he agreed that the mouse was really royal frickin' blue. We've told multiple people, my mum included, and no one believes us. But we know what we saw. I slipped on icy stairs last winter and I swear I saw my own butt crack as I fell. No one believes me. How did that go over? Hey mom, guess what? I saw my own butt crack today. Maybe if you pulled your own head out of your butt, that wouldn't happen. When I was about 10 or 11, we were having a get-together at Grandma's house for the holidays. All of us cousins played all day, and when night fell, we played hide-and-seek, while the adults smoked and drank up by the house. We stayed on the back of the property, just having a good time. I was hiding in between a bush and the property fence when I heard the strangest sound. It was almost a scream, both happy and miserable at the same time. I jumped up and kind of shouted. All my cousins heard it, and we all saw it too. It was an animal on 2 legs, and it ran off with really jerky motions. Being the oldest by about 3 years, I calmed down the crying little ones and explained as best as I could that it was just someone trying to scare us. I've had nightmares about that sound. In my mind, it sounds like a grotesque mimicry of our joyous screams and laughter as we played. None of my cousins today will admit to even remembering the incident, although the adults remembered the commotion it caused. I've seen the Dogman too. Holy crap, I came here to write about it and I saw your story. I was camping in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, at J.W. Wells State Park. It was late, around midnight. Us kids were in a giant tent, there were 9 of us. Adults drinking at the campfire. Suddenly, there were headlights shining into our camp. A ranger pulled up and rushed over to speak to the adults in whispered, frantic tones. Not 2 minutes later, our parents were scrambling to get us out of the tent. We all piled into the van, scared. My mum explains that there are a family of wolverines in the campground that are aggravated over something, so the rangers want everyone in the vehicles. We're giggling and screwing around in the van for an hour when we hear this bone-chilling cackle like a scream. It was loud. We all shut right up and were staring at each other, and I'm wondering whether a wolverine really makes that sound when our tent we were just in was ripped apart. We watched as something collapsed it and was thrashing around for what seemed like forever. All we had was the light of the campfire, myself and my 2 cousins staring hard into the darkness behind the van, trying to make out this wolverine tearing up our canvas tent. It went still and my dad and drunk uncle ran to the tent's remains, beating it with sticks. They didn't find anything. No animal, no nothing. The scream came again as they were kicking through the remains from the woods behind the van. My uncle pointed his giant craftsman flashlight immediately in that direction, and something furry standing on 2 legs took off running, howling and screaming and cackling as it went, hooking its weird angled arms above its head. I saw the flashlight shine in its eyes, and that was no frickin' bear. We slept in our cars and left as soon as the sun was up. We left the shredded canvas tent behind, and my mum snapped a picture. I'll ask her for it next time I talk to her if anyone's interested. The ranger refunded our week plus the night we stayed and gave us a truck bed full of firewood. I think the adults knew it wasn't wolverines. When I was 5, I woke up from my sleep and saw a man sitting on the stairs watching me. I wasn't scared though. There was something tranquil about it. I just watched him and he watched me for what seemed like 10 minutes. Then all of a sudden, he was gone. A few days later, I found out my dad was killed in Europe. I live in Canada and my parents were separated. There's pictures of me with him when I was just born, but he left shortly after that. To this day, that's the only memory I have of my dad, a ghost watching over me. I don't believe in ghosts, but I know what I saw. I've never told anyone before except my mum. My mum used to see her dead sister standing at the end of her bed, watching her for years after she passed away. It was always peaceful and tranquil, she says. She liked seeing her. But then one night it just didn't feel right. My mom got scared and shouted for her to go away. She never came back after that. Well, that's quite enough supernatural for me for one day. No thanks, dead relatives. I don't need house calls. You can all stay in Bumper Car Valhalla or wherever you are. My mum, dad, and I were driving through rural Alabama late one night, headed to see family for Christmas over 10 years ago. We were in a Ford Explorer. Mum was driving and Dad and I were sleeping. I woke up for a moment in the back seat just in time to see what looked like a buffalo dead in the road, and then the Explorer went up and over the dead buffalo and it scraped the undercarriage of the car. I asked my mum in my sleepy days, "Was that a buffalo?" To which she replied, "I don't know." I closed my eyes. My friend and I were watching basketball in the early days that Charles Barkley was a panelist. He was apologizing for calling a team midgets and saying that he knew it was offensive. But as they were going to commercial, we both heard him say over a hot mic, "Besides, they shouldn't hate me, they should hate God." My friend and I were amazed and convinced he would be fired. But not only did we never hear about it again, the clip doesn't even exist online anywhere. It's as though we had a double delusion. One time when I was really young, like maybe 10 years old, I came home after school and was making myself a salami sandwich. I pulled the bag of salami out and took out 2 slices. I slapped the 2 slices together, and suddenly they became one. I tried my hardest to separate them, but there was no seam or anything that I could split them up with. I even showed it to my mum, but not a single person believed me when I told them. I had fused 2 pieces of salami together. Cold-cut welding. I'm in line at a cafeteria. The guy in front of me is holding out a pudding cup. Someone walking by stumbles and falls into pudding cup guy, knocking his pudding cup out of his hand. While everyone is looking at stumbling guy, the pudding cup goes a good 2 feet straight up in the air. Pudding cup guy is totally focused and at the last second, turns and catches the pudding cup behind his back. He looks at me, smiles, and that was that. No one else saw it. A monkey jumping from car to car on a busy street. I could probably draw a sketch of it even though this happened about 5 years ago. Definitely one of the most odd things I saw. Unfortunately, everyone thinks I'm telling a bad joke when I explain what I saw, or they just nod it off and continue not giving a frick. In 1994, on a farm in the southern Midwest United States, 5-year-old me has this huge yellow lab, sweetest dog in the world, who one day suddenly lost her crap barking and ran outside. Being 5, I followed her and watched her run out into the cow pasture, where the cows were suspiciously nowhere in sight, and she went toe-to-toe with a fricking grey wolf. That area at the time was definitely not wolf country. Coyote, sure, but there's no way that was a coyote. The thing towered over my lab, and I'd seen plenty enough coyotes to know that this thing was not one of them. My lab barked her damn head off right in his face, and after about a minute he tilted his head and then just turned around and disappeared into the woods. Found all the cows at the opposite end of the pasture circled around the 2 calves we had. They were never terrified of coyotes and they had no fear of domestic dogs. The Labrador literally climbed over them when they laid down and would tug on their tails. The cows gave no fricks. I'll go to my damn grave saying it was a wolf I saw, but nobody believes me, of course. I've spent years researching wolves and wolf hybrids, but every picture I've seen of both the animal and the paw prints he left behind says it was very, very, very much more wolf than coyote or dog or even a mix. What food would you pay not to eat again? My grandma's. She's never cooked with herbs. Salt and pepper were on the table, not added during cooking. Almost everything was boiled. I don't know why. She had cookbooks. She had a garden, and when the vegetables were ripe, she brought them to die a slow death in her pot. Mine was just the psych ward fruit cup. My least favorite food when I was at the mental institution was the unseasoned powdered scrambled eggs. How are you supposed to feel better when the food itself is that depressing? Was just thinking of this today, actually. My mum used to bake unseasoned chicken breasts with a slice of American cheese on top. That's it. That's the meal. My dad once served mustard chicken. Chicken breasts left bare save for a single line of yellow mustard down the middle. Then baked until dry. He's gotten pretty good at following recipes and even adapting them a bit for allergies. But on his own, tragic. My mother-in-law's Taco Tuesday. Unseasoned boiled ground beef, then put in a pasta strainer and washed. To get rid of the grease. Lettuce, tomato, pre-shredded bag of cheese, and that's it. 1 taco each. I have not been back to dinner there since, which may have been her plan all along. My grandmother-in-law had a sign in her kitchen that said, "Spices equal love." So I guess she hated us. My mom's cooking. She overcooked everything, which is why I hated any kind of meat growing up. When it takes 46 chews for a piece of pot roast, it's bad. My parents did the same. I thought my uncle was a genius chef for a brief period when I was 16, and he actually made a juicy steak. Everything my parents made needed to be drowned in ketchup to be remotely edible. They've gotten better recently, thankfully. Ah yes, the old generational differences. Boil it until it's killed without a doubt and all the evil, sinful color has been taken away. That'll make the kids grow up thin and godly. Ramen with hot dogs. Friend's mum used to make it for us when we were there. She threw the sauce packet away and drained all water. It was like eating paste with a cut-up hot dog. That's so weird because for like 50 cents more you can have mac and cheese and hot dogs, which is a masterpiece of sketchy materials. That's why I think she was soulless. Like the food. I mean, why deny us the flavor packet? My high school cafeteria served 3 kinds of cheap pizza that you just microwave, and you knew the difference by the shape. Triangle pizza was a stuffed crust pizza. It was usually good for the crust, but it was a little greasy. Circle pizza was awesome as far as I was concerned. The pepperoni was diced, and I could eat 4 of those things if they let me. But the square pizza tasted like sadness, like the crushing reality of our impending adulthood. I recently found a pizza that tastes exactly like it. It costs 84 cents. It tasted like the feeling of a sad apartment with only a milk crate and a pillow for furniture. Boiled, unseasoned rutabaga. Tastes like 16th century serfdom, winter, and desperation. A friend of mine invited my partner and I over for dinner. We knew we were both originally from the South and had been living in the Midwest for many years. I can only assume she Googled Southern food recipes because she made us chicken and dumplings, which is a food we both enjoy. We sat down to eat and I asked for some pepper. She had to go get some out of her roommate's spice cabinet and brought the salt too. Because she didn't want to overseason the food, she just didn't put any in while cooking. She ate hers with no seasoning. We asked her later and she just never uses spices or salt when cooking. Wasn't a bad meal, it was a bad situation. I was 20 and stupid. I flew to Denver to meet my internet boyfriend. It was my first relationship and I was so excited. Long story short, I discovered he'd lied about many things and started to question him. And he dumped me. I was alone in a huge city I wasn't familiar with, heartbroken and scared, and hungry. So I went across the street to a family restaurant, only place with food within walking distance, and said, just one. I could tell the hostess felt bad for me. Ordered the most expensive thing on the menu, orange roughy, and my favorite dessert, bread pudding. I just couldn't enjoy it. I cried through it while all the families and couples stared at me. Tolerex, the hypoallergenic meal replacement formula that hospitals use for tube feeding patients. I've been getting most of my day's calories from this compost-adjacent slime smoothie for a few months now. I'm not quite ready to hurl it all out the window while screaming, mostly because I don't want to starve. But damn, there are days. Met a beautiful city boy who said he doesn't bring ladies home to meet his parents until it's official. Spent the summer in the garden and finally at harvest time he invited me home to meet his folks at a barbecue. I asked what I could bring, they said veggie sides. I brought some freshly picked corn, peas and carrots from the garden, hoping I could roast the corn on the grill and maybe maple glaze the carrots, gifting the unshelled peas to his mum. This Britia bee kicked me out of the kitchen to fetch the boys a beer, then boiled the lot of it to within an inch of its life. The batty woman scraped the corn off the cob and served a boiled corn-carrot-pea mash without salt and told everyone it was my contribution. Ouch. Okay, that sounds like actual sabotage. I had an upper GI test where I had to drink a radioactive smoothie which was like fruit-flavored and chalky and thick. I wasn't digesting it fast enough for the test, so they gave me a second one, which they wanted me to drink fast. I was having trouble doing that and it devolved to the doctor basically chanting, chug, 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 while I cry-gagged the thing down. My friend's mum would make boiled noodles with watered-down ketchup as the marinara sauce. Even as a kid, I knew there was something seriously wrong with that combo. My grandma's turkey sandwiches. There was nothing wrong with the taste, they tasted fine, if a bit off. 2 turkey slices with lettuce, cheese and ketchup. We'd always eat them when we visited them in Vegas, but we also always kept throwing up or felt sick the day after or at the airport. My mum and dad would chalk it up to eating a little bit too much candy because my mum would always get us some when we departed to keep us busy or to have a snack. But when I threw up by the pool with no candy chunks to speak of, like the rest of the time, my parents started to get a bit suspicious, so they asked her. She had been using expired turkeys. A bit of context. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, my dad used to work at a deli, and the deli was holding a sale for turkeys. My dad bought 13 for a joke gift for my grandma on her birthday. Turns out she had been using these turkeys for the sandwiches for over 20 years. And one time at dinner, my dad said she had just run out in 2017. So yeah, no wonder me and my siblings kept throwing up. We even gave the occasion a name, the Sick Day in Vegas. My sister and her ex-boyfriend invited everyone over to see their apartment they got together. His aunt made some deviled eggs that consisted of relish, jalapeno, and fricking raisins, which she conveniently hid under everything. To add insult to injury, she somehow made them so runny that they practically squirted at you when you bit into one. I grabbed one thinking it was a regular deviled egg, and almost immediately it made me sick. I've never eaten another deviled egg since then. It's kind of a true running joke that when I make videos for this channel about people's medical conditions, I let people know if any or a lot of the stories are making me gag and causing me difficulty recording. Spoiler alert, most of the medical ones are. Weirdly enough, I would say the awful culinary monstrosities on display in this video are challenging my gag reflex and causing retakes even more regularly. Oh god, those eggs sound like crimes against nature. Truly devil's eggs. A burnt lasagna from Wegmans that a former boss deemed fitting for a company Christmas party. It was made by strangers' hands and served by an emotionally hollow jerk to people he viewed to be as interchangeable as the parts on the machines we were hired to repair. It was the most evil lasagna that I'd ever sunk a fork into. Reminds me of the time when my former employer brought us one large pizza and large salad for our shop, about less than 15 grown men, and then invited the other shop to join us too, about another 15 dudes. The most embarrassing thing ever. This was for sending out a project that was overdue due to management and owner. God, the mental image of 30 dudes standing over one box of sad-looking pizza and some leaves is sending me. A bee flew into my mouth when I was a toddler. The way my mom cooked meat when I was growing up. Take the frozen steak, put it on a cold pan, turn the heat on, wait. No oil or anything. Burnt on the outside, cold and raw on the inside. She was my inspiration to learn to cook. My mother had the exact same approach to cooking, except she deep-fried. Everything was deep-fried, even pre-packaged food with instructions on how to cook it. My mother's entire focus in cooking was speed. Deep frying was fast, highest heat possible because it cooked faster, as she never wanted to do the work of cooking and hated having to. The irony has not been lost on me that she spent more time actively spending 5 minutes deep frying than she would have leaving many of these things in the oven for 20 minutes. Of course, this resulted in some absolute disasters that were burnt on the outside yet raw in the middle. I didn't know the butter in a garlic Kiev was supposed to melt until I was cooking for myself. Worse though is I've been sick numerous times due to eating food that's simultaneously burnt and raw. Chicken that runs the color scale from black to white to pink was a common occurrence. Growing up, my mother always assumed that I was a fussy eater because I regularly left food or turned my nose in disgust at the abominations she served. Turns out, once I took to cooking for myself, she saw that actually I loved a lot of food when it was actually cooked in an edible manner. My husband's parents boil a lot, but the boiled asparagus they served up at Easter dinner every year just kills me. This potato salad my aunt served once. The taste is almost indescribable. The only thing I can compare it to is the taste of earwax, which I tried out of curiosity at 9 years old, don't judge me. It was bitter and saltless, and I didn't even use my fork that night because it had touched the disgusting potato slop. I didn't know potato salad could even be good until about 5 years later. Cold, plain oatmeal. I grew up in a Pennsylvania Dutch area. I love ham, potatoes, and green beans. My mother-in-law tried to make it for me. It was just processed ham cubes, potatoes, and frozen peas brought to boiling. No onion, salt, or pepper, nothing. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Mac and cheese without the cheese. It's like giving up on life when eating it. I'd used the cheese packet on something else and was hungry and just made the noodles. Last time I made that mistake. I was a broke college student at the time. I couldn't afford any of the additional ingredients everyone has listed to make it better. There was a time that I would take condiments from the cafeteria and put them on crackers, which I stole from the soup station in lieu of actual meals. It's a toss-up between Ina Garten's hummus recipe and a plate of red beans and rice I had at a, quote, Cajun place in Montana. Microwaved poached chicken. My mom would take bone-in chicken breasts and boil them in a glass bowl filled with water in the microwave. This grey meat would then be shredded and used for various recipes. She also nuked scrambled eggs, which made the house smell like a hobo died on a toilet. When I was in 7th grade, a friend invited me to her house. Her very waspy mum served lunch. Tuna sandwiches, my favorite. I took a nice big bite. Reader, they were olive sandwiches. Chopped up cans of black olives mixed with a ton of Miracle Whip. I couldn't figure out what to do with the salty, oily blob in my mouth. Thankfully, my friend went to the kitchen with her mum to get drinks and I spat it out onto a planter. I've never been able to eat olives since then. Was at a relative's house. She dumped chicken legs into a greased 9 by 13-inch pan and covered them with a 28-ounce can of tomatoes. Baked at 350 Fahrenheit for a long time. Chicken cacciatore, she said. No salt, nothing. 2 ingredients. Had a tightwad friend make dinner one night. It was plain rice with boiled chicken. No spices or flavor. It was plain chicken and plain rice. He didn't even put salt in the chicken water. Creamed chicken on toast. It was my parents' way of saying, "We don't really want you kids." Chickpeas. Just rehydrated chickpeas. I was a student and had finals and didn't leave the flat, but I ran out of other food. In the morning, I ate a bowl of them that had soaked overnight, washed up, and then left the dinner chickpeas to soak. This was for a number of days. It was miserable and ruined them for me. Well, we all had our student meal routines, no matter how awful they were. Thinking back on mine makes me feel terrible. Porridge twice a day, with tuna pasta for lunch. I swear that eating bottom-shelf tinned tuna every day for 2 years must have given me some level of mercury poisoning. It's just unclear how much. Oh well. When I was a freshman in high school, our city would always do a pretty cheap program for the teenagers in town to keep us away from all the vacationing college kids during spring break. We were a pretty popular destination. Free food, drink, carnival rides, games, prizes, and what have you for the whole day. One day I happened to be wandering around the stage area when they called for anyone who hadn't eaten lunch that day yet. I hadn't, so I raised my hand and got called up. It was me and some girl maybe 2 or 3 years older, and they pull out a plate for us. Cheeseburger, fried chicken drumstick, bag of flaming hot Cheetos, big red soda, and a brownie. We get ready to dig in when the host says, "We don't really have time to watch you guys eat all this, so tell you what, let's make this easier for both of you," and they bring out a blender, shove everything inside, and puree everything together. The smell was sickly sweet like fresh spew and stuck to the sides of the bottle they served it to us in. The host said they only had one prize for this game and whoever drank the most of the mixture would win. Being a idiot teenager, I went cheers to the crowd and upended the bottle down my throat. It was like someone took a slushie and ran it through broken glass. It burned the throat as it went down, stuck to the roof of my mouth, and chunks of poorly ground bone got lodged everywhere. It did go down though, and a full minute later I had an empty bottle and a stomach full of satanic diarrhea. And the prize? A t-shirt. The same t-shirt we all got for simply buying a ticket to the program. I threw up about 10 seconds after walking off stage. Hospital turkey sandwich. Unseasoned pork chops. Literally water if it was a food. Cabbage lasagna. Basically using cabbage instead of the lasagna sheet thingies. That's a shame because at that point they could have just made cabbage rolls and had an actual food that tastes good. A Midwestern church potluck dinner. I didn't know so many different casseroles could all taste the same despite different ingredients and be so bland. My mother-in-law once made a grilled cheese sandwich by placing a slice of cheese between 2 pieces of bread and then nuking it in the microwave for a full minute. They always do everything 1 full minute at a time. That's the way us kids could safely make a grilled cheese without using the stove. But we toasted the bread first and then nuked it for about 10 minutes or so. My mom makes constant sarcastic remarks about my cooking. This is the same woman who says boiling pasta in salty water makes it too spicy. Luku. It's a staple in the Congo. You take the root of the manioc plant, soak it in water for a while to remove the cyanide, dry it and then pound it into a flour. To make a meal, you simply mix it with water. It has the consistency and taste of Play-Doh. Cyanide, you say? Yeah, it causes problems when people are really starving and don't want to wait the couple of days until it leaches out. Some eat it raw, and there were some deaths due to cyanide poisoning. My mother-in-law brought us a chicken soup soon after I had a kid. She's not a good cook, but had recently learned you can make soup from a rotisserie chicken carcass It's so easy. You just put it in the pot and add water. Well, there's a little more to it than that if you want it to be a good soup. So we got boiled chicken water made from a few days old carcass. She didn't boil it long enough to be flavorful. There were no seasonings. She didn't put salt in to make it healthy. She put canned green beans in it, which is like one of two foods my husband utterly despises for reasons she should well know. And celery. Bland, celery-flavored, mushy bean and old chicken water. I'd rather she'd tossed me a can of Campbell's. Growing up in England in the 60s and 70s, there's a reason people from all over the world told jokes about the food there. My favourite joke about England is, I can't believe they had the audacity to destroy so many cultures to get spices and then never use any of them. I used to sleep over at one of my friend's houses as a kid, and his mum would make breakfast for us. Same thing every time, scrambled eggs on white bread. Not toast, just cold, straight out of the package white bread. It just tasted weird and soggy and limp with those eggs on there. I was always secretly wondering what the heck the deal was. We were 60 seconds of toasting and a touch of butter away from a perfectly decent breakfast, but their whole family ate them that way, on cold, boring white bread, so I just kinda sucked it up and did it. It was so disappointing. And it's not like they were poor either. They had a fairly huge house in a damn pricey part of Long Island. The dad was a dentist, and they were doing fine. Just didn't like toasting things, I guess. Growing up, we had this square Tupperware thing for transporting sandwiches in. I learned if you cracked 2 eggs in that, some salt and pepper and mixed it up and microwaved it, it'd like poof up a bit and cook, and make this perfect sandwich-sized egg to put on the white bread. That, plus a slice of cheese and mayo on 2 slices of white bread, were had quite often. My pop saw me eating one day and was like, "That's gotta be nasty, right?" So I offered him a bit. He liked it so much he had me make him one. And that was my first baby step into becoming the redneck Iron Chef I am today. Thank you for your service, redneck Iron Chef. May you make Guy Fieri forever proud. Also, no thank you. Sincerely, the food snob narrator. A cheese quesadilla that was just a tortilla folded in half with a sprinkling of shredded mozzarella cheese inside, served with a leaf of lettuce and 1/3 fat sour cream. For dessert was a blueberry bagel with mayonnaise. That particular college roommate was banned from making dinner ever again. Some more details, as I wasn't expecting all the responses I'm getting. The tortilla was a processed, generic disc of preservative-laden flour, acquired by another roommate from some bottom grocery store shelf, with a handful of flavorless Kraft mozzarella cheese. Literally just folded in half, not heated or anything. There were 4 of us living in that apartment, and the roommate responsible had never prepared food in her life. Which was understandable, but she kept arguing with the rest of us that she didn't need cooking lessons, and so she was no longer allowed to feed us her culinary concoctions. That mayo on bagel sounds like a hate crime, and I can't stop laughing. Decided to get in better shape. I'm already in okay shape, but I just needed better. Grilled chicken, white rice, and cucumber was my meal of choice for 3 months straight, apart from snacks, breakfast, and pasta for lunch. Twice a day. At the end, I could not physically take a bite out of chicken and got myself a greasy burger. My weight-obsessed grandma once gave me, when I was 7 to 8, what she said was going to be Parmesan chicken, but turned out to be a piece of chicken with a sliver of Parmesan about 3 centimeters across. It wasn't even food, it was a passive-aggressive statement about my weight. It did later turn out she'd also tried to get me and my brother to eat Stackers, basically crystal that makes you not hungry, because she thought we were fat, which we weren't. We're both fine now, this was about 10 to 15 years ago, and we're now living a healthy life. That or the first time I tried to make my own food. I ate pasta. Literally just pasta. Probably a cheap supermarket sausage roll. Tasteless pastry, tasteless sausage with low meat content. Your thoughts instantly flit to lunch lady Doris grinding up gym mats. Weight Watchers and Slimming World recipes, all based on fricking chopped tomatoes and stock. Who'd have thought seasoning had so many gosh darn calories? Boiled broccoli without any spices. No wonder so many people hate it. You just boil the taste out of it. Add salt at least, it's not that hard. This is coming from someone who likes broccoli. As a kid, I ate grass that tasted better than boiled broccoli. I was a weird kid. To be honest, as I'm writing this, I kinda want to eat some grass right now. I had an ex whose mum made meatloaf with the following ingredients: ground beef, breadcrumbs. There was no ketchup on top, no seasonings of any kind used. I swear it was like something that I imagined them feeding to prisoners in the hole or something. I lost my McRib virginity recently, realized it's no different from a frozen rib sandwich from a vending machine. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.